about. This is what Mesirus Nefesh is about, to look for your pnimius, for your own. Like I saw today a video of, and this is what I'm going to conclude with. Rabbi Steinsaltz passed away last week, and he was a big goen and a big chosid of the Rebbe. I knew him a little personally because my father is a mechaber seforim, and they had a kesher. For many years he helped also my father with a program in a computer. I'm talking about almost 40 years ago when I was a child or more. He had the first program to be menaked for him on the computer. So he helped my father with Kitzur Shchonot and later on. And I saw an interview with Rabbi Steinsaltz today in the Israeli TV. And one of the questions that he was asked is, so what is davening by you different than after you learned Hasidus, different than the way how you davened before, or when you started learning Hasidus? So he said, today my davening is that I am every place that I'm davening, if it's in Tzemach Tzedek shul or any other shul, it's not only about the Eibishter. Before, when I was davening, I was thinking that davening is about the Eibishter. Now, after I learned Hasidus, I understand that davening is about me and the Eibishter. It's like a meeting 3 times a day, me and the Eibishter. I see myself and the Eibishter in the davening. And this was a very strong line for me. This is why I'm very, very happy that we have with us Rabbi Paltiel, Rabbi Yizchok, that I don't have to tell you about Rabbi Paltiel, because if you are here tonight and you are not from the Mispalim Kvuim, it's because Rabbi Paltiel. So this is not what I'm trying to say. I'm very happy that we have the opportunity to Farbrengen with Rabbi Paltiel, because can't be a better person and personality and way of teaching and Chassidus and Bechlal Farbrengen with connection to the subject of Chof. And I think it's a great idea that we are together tonight. And let's say Anign. After we will say L'chaim. We have to say L'chaim. It's a Yom Ha'ilule. It's a Yom Yisoirus. So, Hayina Namu Yina soll geben, von gelegt die ganze schon mit ich will geben gepackt. Bitte. Ja. We have chairs inside. If you can come inside, please. Bais side. We have empty chairs, please. If you can come inside. Ja. Naftole.
Shalom Aleichem. Shalom Aleichem. To those I know and those I don't know. I'm going to talk in English, okay? I don't know everybody. Shalom Aleichem. As they say in American, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. In Yiddish, you can't say in the shul. But some of you, I don't know who you are. So thank you for coming. L'chaim Levracha. L'chaim is going to be a good zach. The Farbrengen should serve a purpose. L'chaim everybody. L'chaim Levracha. L'chaim Levracha. L'chaim Levracha. L'chaim.
Nothing.
I think if we're going to have a Farbrengen for Chof Menachem, it's the Yorzait of the Rebbe's father, of course. Maybe one of the places to start is with the Indian of Kibbud Avayim. I got to make the speeches, so I have to decide what I'm going to talk about. So I think that one of the things that is a legitimate point of beginning for a Farbrengen of Chof is the from Kibbud Avayim, the idea of Kibbud Avayim. Now, there are not many stories known, and not all the stories that are known are necessarily reliable. In other words, I've been in Lubavitch my whole life, thank God, and I've heard many stories. Some stories I don't even remember where I heard them. And people ask me all the time, where'd you take this story? And quite often I'm able to find them a source, and then sometimes you find that I didn't quote it precisely, but there are many stories that I just don't remember. I heard them as a child or as a bacher, and I don't remember my sources. But the few stories, there are a few stories that are known about the Rebbe and his Kibbud Avayim. And this is what I'm going to start with. This is the beginning of our Farbrengen for Chof Menachemov. We'll talk with the Rebbe's Kibbud Avayim. The Rebbe's Kibbud Avayim. So I'll tell you a few stories. One of them is, I heard this as a bacher. Again, I don't know how reliable these stories are. I'm not going to keep apologizing. Okay? Make one apology for the whole night. Yeah. As I ever heard that there was a period of time that the Rebbe had a minig to bring his parents the mail. There was a bacher, a young man. So every day he would wait for the mailman. However he did it, then he would bring his parents the mail. And the Rebbe's parents understood that the Rebbe is bringing them the mail is eaten from Kibbud Avayim. That's how they understood it. A kid said, then the Rebbe got sick. For those who do not know, the Rebbe's hasmada, the Rebbe's diligence, as a bechlal, but as a young person, was so intense that the Rebbe's Chana, the Rebbe's mother, used to tell people that she has to fight with her boys, they should eat. Schlagen sich sollen essen. To rip them away from a sefer to eat something. So the Rebbe was an incredible masmid, and he didn't have time for anything. There were a few well-known occasions where the Rebbe closed the sefer and he got involved in the Yonam of Askanos because there was a very acute need. The Rebbe stopped his Seder HaChaim and did what needed to be done. And one of those was when there was an epidemic of typhus. About 100 years ago. and people were sick. And there was a quarantine, not like we have a quarantine that you live in your house. They put you into a sanitarium, which is basically a place to wait to die. And Yidden will make a nefesh to help each other out. And this is the story that's told, that the Rebbe closed his sefer, and he went into these sanitariums, and he went from patient to patient. I don't understand the nature of this illness, but apparently it's very painful, physically painful. And you need very involved care to be able to live. You have to clean the tongue. Again, these are things that I heard. I don't understand much of it, and I don't want to say something that's incorrect. Bottom line is, Rebbe got sick himself. Rebbe got sick. And there was a period of time that the Rebbe Kvayachal was delirious. He was laying in bed and he was delirious. And he was speaking what appeared to be incoherently. So this part of the story is true. To the Rebbe's Nechana, the Rebbe's mother related that when the Rebbe was in this physical condition, if you leaned over and you listened, he was muttering, he was talking. If you leaned over and listened, he was talking not to anybody in particular, he was Farbrengen. And the teichen of his words were how incredibly awesome the higher worlds are, and how it's worthwhile to abandon the higher worlds to come into this world and serve Hashem on the physical level. This was the Farbrengen, the Rebbe was a bocher. He was in his teens. The Rebbe was already then, his whole Metzias was Lasses Leis Barach, Nida B'Tachtein. And the story is the Rebbe wasn't bringing his parents the mail. And then discovered why the Rebbe was picking up the mail for them. The Rebbe was corresponding with the Rogatchover. He was a teenager. And he used the name Gerari. You know, Rabbi Weinfeld sent me a clip today from Rabbi Gerari from Chavre Shas, Shalom, Zechrin and Bracha. Rabbi Gerari's father, he's named after his own father. He didn't know his father. Rabbi Gerari's father's name was Mordechai Gerari, just like his name was Mordechai Gerari. And the Rebbe used to use his name and address. When the Rebbe corresponded, Schneerson was a really, really bad name. So the Rebbe Pashat used his name and address as a way of making his correspondence less obvious and less scrutinized. The Rebbe was corresponding with the Rogatchover. So the Rebbe got sick. So the Rebbe's parents got the mail. The Rogatchover used to write everything on postcards. He didn't seal envelopes. There's a book on the Rogatchover, how he wrote, how he corresponded. All of his letters are mechtavim gluyim. He didn't want to write a closed envelope, so he shouldn't be machzor somebody with reading somebody else's mail. A postcard anybody can read. That's by definition what a postcard means. And he wrote only on postcards. And the Rebbe's parents saw the Rogatchover, but the Rebbe was before 20. And the way they corresponded, and perhaps even how the Rogatchover addressed the Rebbe, so they understood why the Rebbe was being mechavet his parents. The Rebbe didn't want his parents to know his involvement. And again, these are stories I heard that Rabbi Leivik once met the Rogatchover, and he asked him his opinion of the person Gerari from Yekaterinslav with whom he was corresponding. He had no idea that he was a teenager. You thought it was an alter god. So the Rogatchover said some very nice things about the Rebbe. This is a story, ein Maisa. A Tzveita Maisa happened here in America, but it goes back to the Rebbe's earliest years. That, this is before I was born, so I obviously don't remember this. The Rebbe used to go see his mother every single day. The Rebbe went to see his mother every single day. Even Rosh Hashanah Kippur, I understand. Every single day the Rebbe went to see his mother. And if I'm not incorrect, it was at 6 o'clock in the afternoon. And one of the most beautiful sights in Lubavitch, the early years of the Rebbe's Nesias, was the Rebbe's walk up Kingston Avenue, because everybody would come and stand. Every single store owner stood by the door as the Rebbe passed every day, and all the shoppers. It was a special moment that Rebbe would pass, going to his mother. So her policy was, she hosted. She was a Rebbetzin. She hosted. Many people came to see her, and she would sit in Farbrengen with them and talk to them. But the 6 o'clock hour was off limits. Everybody knew that she never hosted guests at that time, because this was her son's time, and she didn't want, it was her time with the Rebbe. In her journal, which is now printed, it's not yet printed in a sefer, but they gave it out in Kontresim, and you can very easily find it online. You can get all the Rebbe Tzanchana's diaries, journal. If you go to lahak.com online, you can find the Yeshiva of the Rebbe Tzanchana, and you can read. She writes, the Rebbe Tzanchana writes again and again how lonely she is. She really didn't like America. I asked people who knew her what the change. She didn't have a common language with the people she was around, even though she had such respect and she was held in such a high esteem. The Rebbe Tzanchana was not comfortable here at all. And she writes again and again to herself. It's in her own private journal. There's only one person who understands me. but I cannot burden him because he's carrying on his shoulders the weight of the whole world. That's what she writes. It's more than once. There's only one person that I could really talk to, but I can't bother him. He has too much else on his mind. So this was her thing. The Rebbe would come every day at 6, and for her this was mamish chayim, and she made sure that there was nobody in the house. Occasionally, she would dafke ask people to come at that hour if she wanted to introduce them to the Rebbe. So one such person, I heard a name, I'm not going to say the name because I don't know how reliable it is. He was in the house when the Rebbe came. And she told him, don't leave. The Rebbe's allowed to see you in my house. And the Rebbe came, and the Rebbe didn't stay for long. The Rebbe's visits usually were quite short. He would come in. I don't know whether he would pour a glass of tea or not. They would sit and they would schmooze. Especially if there were other people in the house, he certainly shortened those visits. And then, of course, the Rebbe walked out. And as the Rebbe walked out of the room, the Rebbe straightened the chairs. She had a dining room set with chairs. And the Rebbe straightened the chairs and he walked out. When the Rebbe Tzimchana, when he left, the Rebbe Tzimchana turns to this person who had witnessed this and says, did you notice that on the way out he straightened the chairs? So he says, yeah. He says, do you know why he did that? He says, how am I supposed to know why he straightened the chairs? He says, because since his bar mitzvah, he has never turned his back to me. Since his bar mitzvah, I never saw his back. But he thinks I don't know. So he does it in an inconspicuous way. The Rebbe wouldn't turn his back to his mother. So to find a pretense for why he's walking out sideways or backwards, he straightened the chair. This is the story of the Rebbe's kibbud avim. And then there's a vart, which again I think it's true. No more apologies. I apologies. I heard that the Rebbe said to his mother at one point, "Ich will sich keimen de schmeichel sein, fahre wegfahren und eigentlich belassen allein." I'll never forgive myself for leaving Russia and leaving you by yourself. The Rebbe was haunted by the fact that for 17 years he was not able to look after his parents, and his parents during that period, it was more than 17 years. I guess it is better 17 years. It was a very difficult period. The last 5 of those years, the Rebbe's father was in Golus, and the Rebbe was very burdened by the fact that he had no choice. He had to leave Russia, he had to marry the Rebbe, and he was the son-in-law of the Friedrich Rebbe, and the Rebbe understood that this wasn't just a marriage, but the Rebbe had a certain guilt that he was not able to mechabed his mother. It's also, again, these are things that I've heard, and people describe it, the way the Rebbe would stand with his mother. The Rebbe was a Rebbe, and he was a very busy man. And the Rebbe Tzimchana was aware. The Rebbe Tzimchana was aware that the Rebbe.
And you let just maybe some people should come closer. Then people that are coming later, they will be able to have a chair. Come. You was doing the right thing. Come here.
No, to the last one.
Yeah, please, if you want. אתה יכול בבקשה להתקרב? Please. I'm sorry about this.
So again, I heard people describe this. That the Rebbe would sometimes walk out with his mother for various reasons. And occasionally, when they were walking, the Rebbetzin would stop and greet people. The Rebbetzin was a very friendly lady, Rebbetzin Chana, the Rebbe's mother. And she knew everybody, and she was very interested in people's lives. And occasionally, even when she was with the Rebbetzin would stop and talk, and the Rebbe would stand. There was a Rebbe. His mother's chatting with some woman who she knew, and the Rebbe would stand there like an Eved, with such a subservience, with such a humility, with such a respect. And of course, the story of stories, and you want to talk about kibbud avim, and this is an interesting story, and it's a story that has many lessons in it for us that maybe we don't want to learn, is how the Rebbe treated his mother when his brother passed away. The Rebbe lost a brother, his name was Label. He was very young. He was very young. He was very young. He was in his 40s. How old could he have been? I don't think he was 50 yet. The Rebbe's brother Label. Yisrael Label. And he passed away in England.
Come in, please.
He passed away in England. And of course the Rebbe made arrangements for his brother's remains to be taken to Yisrael, and he should be buried, and so on and so forth. But the Rebbe also decided that his mother shouldn't be told. He didn't want his mother to know. And so first of all, when he sat Shiva, that Derech Agav, this week, Lubavitch lost another chassid, a Yid by the name of Zalmanov. So Rabbi Yosef Zalmanov. So in the articles of him, they describe he was a 12-year-old boy. He was very close to the Bais Harav, very close to the Rabbeim. He knew that the Rebbe lost his brother. And he went to look at the other Spitz Chabadnik, his friend who also was on the inside, from Montreal. They were the same age, they were 12-year-olds. So they described in the magazine, whichever magazine it was, I tried to read these articles, that he came to Bedford and Dean and he found Yitzchok Meir. He took him outside and he told him that the Rebbe's brother passed away and that nobody's allowed to know, it's a big secret and so forth and so on. So the Rebbe said to his father, "Favos reden de Kinder." The Rebbe said to Shmuel Zalman, "Why are the children talking?" In other words, these are the kinds of things that nobody should be speaking about. The Rebbe honored his mother, that she never knew, she never discovered that her son had passed away. And it began with the Shiva. And during the Shiva, it was very difficult. The Rabbi Yael Khan writes in his Rishimis that you could see on the Rebbe that something is bothering him. The Rebbe is very tzibroch. And the Rebbe said Kaddish for a week for his brother. They made a little minyan, and there was just a very small group of people who had this information. B'chal Anash and Tmimim didn't know about it, and every day he went to see his mother. During the week of Shiva, he went to see his mother. So he had Beryl Eunuch paint he had the oil shoes, they're blue, navy, so he had them paint in black, and the Rebbe put into his shoes beans, raw beans, so that the walk would be uncomfortable, because the Rebbe didn't want to walk in the street as a novel. And he arranged that he would go into his mother every single day of that week. He would go into his mother, and Beryl Eunuch was told, whatever the number was, count to 20 and call. So that would walk in, and he would sit down with his mother, and within a minute the phone would ring. And I don't know how Beryl Eunuch managed to do this. He must have been a pretty smart guy. He would engage the Rebbetzin in a conversation, and the Rebbetzin would converse back, and the Rebbe would say, "I see that you're busy, I'll come back tomorrow," and he would leave. So during the few days of Shiva, the Rebbe shortened his visits especially. And of course, for the next 13 years, the Rebbe forged his brother's handwriting. He forged his brother's handwriting and wrote letters on behalf of his brother. There was a whole spiel how the letters were sent from England, and they would go into the post box and they would take them out and they would open the letters. The Rebbe had a sister-in-law. The Rebbe had a wife. She would correspond with the Rebbe, and she would send him pictures of their daughter. And the Rebbe would open the mail and add a few lines and sign Leib, and he would sign in the Rebbe's brother's handwriting. And this is especially meaningful because they found those letters. They found those letters in the Rebbe's house. When the Rebbe Tzachana passed away, all of her belongings were taken to the Rebbe's house and put on the third floor. And about 15 years ago, they were mefarsim, maybe a half a dozen, a whole bunch of the Rebbe's of signatures that the Rebbe wrote in his brother's handwriting. They gave it out. I mean, I saw it. It was available to anybody who wanted it. It's not a big secret. When you see the Rebbe, I don't know what word it is, forging, imitating his brother's handwriting, as time passes, you see he doesn't try as hard. Towards the end, it pretty much looks like the Rebbe's own handwriting. But in the beginning, the Rebbe was careful. He wrote letters to his mother in his brother's hand that the Rebbe Tzachana should not know, which is not a simple thing. And then, of course, when the Rebbe Tzachana passed away, the way the Rebbe was machabed her, in her schus, the Rebbe spoke, the Rebbe Farbrengen every single Shabbos, the year that she passed away, and the Rebbe spoke the Rashi Sichos. All of these things were done from Kibbut Avim to honor it's Kibbut Avim, Kabed Sevich V'Semecha, to honor his father and his mother. On the other hand, on the other side of the coin, the Rebbe's parents had a pretty good idea of Vasarazun Zehaben. They had a pretty good idea what kind of a son they had. So again, I'll share a few stories. Kaidem called a Maise from Reb Leivik. I heard the story from somebody who heard the story from somebody who heard the story from Reb Simcha Gorodetsky. In other words, it's fourth hand. Reb Simcha Gorodetsky was in the Rebbe's father's house in the 1930s. Reb Simcha Gorodetsky was a big chassid. He was Rebbe Yama Gorodetsky's brother. He sat in many years. He was in Nachlas HaChabad, yeah? No, Kfar Chabad. He was a big chassid. Simcha Gorodetsky was a real Chassidish Yid, and he paid a high price for his Chassidus. Rabbi Weinfeld mentioned Mercedes Nefesh. He had much Mercedes Nefesh in the Soviet Union. So Reb Simcha Gorodetsky was in the Rebbe's parents' house, and a letter came. The mail came. So Reb Leivik looked through the mail, This is an amazing story. He picked up one letter, he put it down, he went and he put on his kapote and his hat and his gartel, and he opened the letter. So Reb Simcha asked Reb Leivik, who is this letter from? That before the Rebbe's father read the letter, he pushed it, he put on his jacket and his kapote. He said, it's a letter from my son. It was a letter from our Rebbe. Reb Simcha Gardetsky was really hoping that it's a letter from the Frierdiker Rebbe, but it was a letter from our Rebbe. So Reb Simcha Gardetsky says to Reb Leivik, for your son you put on your hat and your jacket and your gartel. So Reb Leivik responded, hat mir schon lange begishting. He passed me long ago. The Rebbe was in his early 30s. hat mir schon lange begishting. He passed me long ago. This is a story with the Rebbe. The Rebbe's father, he says, the Yakrus, the Rebbe's father had for the Rebbe. And as far as the Rebbe Tzanchana, I mean, there's so many stories about how the Rebbe Tzanchana spoke about the Rebbe in such a... when in her last days, she said to Beryl Eunuch, she said, as our Rebbe came on the Givez. A Rebbe, such a Rebbe there never was. A Rebbe who knows so much, there never was. Such a Rebbe there never was. Ich sage es nicht, weil ich bin a Mame, ich sage es, weil sie der Emes. I'm not saying it as a mother, I'm saying it because it's the truth. There's a lady who comes to my classes in 770. She's an elderly woman. So she told me that she was a young woman, she was a married woman. She had a relationship with the Rebbe Tzanchana, with the Rebbe's mother. And the Rebbe Tzanchana lived in 1418 President Street. What's now the dormitory, the second building, not the corner building, the building next door. There are two apartment buildings that are joined, that's the dormitory. The Rebbe Tzanchana lived in 1418. So when it was nice weather and she was feeling okay, she was not young, she would take a beach chair, take an outdoor chair, and she would sit on the corner, in other words, on Kingston Avenue by the little wall, and she had an attendant, and she would sit there, people would pass, she would greet them, she would ask them who they were, she would ask people how they're doing. This was one of her things. She was very social in this way, Rebbe Tzanchana. So this lady told me that she was standing there, and there were young couples pushing baby carriages. Now, why is that a big deal? Young couples pushing baby carriages. If we can understand the difficulty of the time, what people had been through and how much had been lost, and how broken the young couples were. It wasn't like, a boy got married, the girl got married. If they had one parent between them at the wedding, that was a lot. Mamish. It was a very, very difficult time. And people's lives they were rebuilding themselves, after the war and after all of the tzaddis. And the Rebbetzin is sitting and she's watching a couple of young women pushing, or young couples walking up Kingston Avenue pushing their baby carriages. And she says to her, I hope I'm giving it correctly. Azelche glickliche Porlach. Die Zun soll gesund sein Porlach. That was her expression. She says, such fortunate couples. They're the couples of my son, soll gesund sein. She referred to the Rebbe. She didn't say the Rebbe. She said my son, but she followed it up with shlita. She would speak about the Rebbe like a chassid. The Zun soll gesund sein Porlach. So anyway, I want to just finish this little Dvar Teire by saying this, that it goes without saying that the Rebbe didn't struggle too much with Kibbutz Avahim. Yeah, the Rebbe didn't struggle too much with anything. He struggled with us. He struggles with the world. Yeah, but yeah. And to say you're going to learn from how the Rebbe behaved, how we should behave, it's not such a bad thing as long as you be realistic about what the Rebbe's mother. The Rebbe Tzanchaya Mushke said once that instead of the bachar imitating the socks that the Rebbe wears, they should imitate how he eats and how he sleeps. They should try that for a while. Instead of imitating what kind of suspenders he uses, matzak, so noch machen dem nicht essen mit schlafen. So, but the Indian of Kibbutz Avahim, I think it's a hira that we all need to take to heart. Kibbutz Avahim, I mean it pashtus. This is exactly, there's no code here, there's no second layer. This is exactly what I want to share. Kibbutz Avahim is the most logical mitzvah in the Torah, I think. Any mitzvah makes more sense. And so many people have such a hard time with it. Kibbutz Avahim is not an easy mitzvah. You have excuses, we have good excuses. It's very emotional, it's very personal, To write a check and give somebody money is not difficult. To write a check and give somebody money, but along with that check and along with that money, you have to give a piece of your heart. you have to have a forgiveness, and you have to have a compromise, and you have to somehow go away from what's your ego. The fact of life is, as strange as it sounds, kibbud av v'eim, which is such a basic mitzvah, it's one of the Aseres HaDibros. People struggle. A lot of people struggle with kibbud av v'eim. It's one of the Aseres HaDibros, especially in America. In America, there's a minig. We only worship the young, old people. You put them in retirement homes. But in Torah it says you have to mechabed sevicha v'simecha, and it doesn't say honor your father and your mother because they deserve it. Honor your father and your mother because they're righteous, because they're your father and your mother. That's their honor. That's the justification for the kibbud. And on whatever level possible, one of the lessons of Chof Menachemov is the lesson of kibbud av v'eim. Pashat, we can all, again, on whatever level, we can all learn from the Rebbe the idea of being mechabed of v'eim, to honor our father and our mother. And honor our father and our mother means to accept the relationship that we have with them, whatever it is. We all have different relationships with our parents. Some of our parents criticize us all the time. Some of our parents have no time for us. Some of our parents mix into our lives in the wrong way. We all have 1,001 reasons why we have trouble with our parents. If we are able to accept the situation that the Eibishter gave us for what it is, and know that we have a mitzvah to honor our father and our mother, not because they're going to give us something back, or not because somehow it's going to play out in a favorable way, but because this is what the Eibishter said. So we will be doing a great thing, and ultimately we're doing something which is going to benefit us ourselves as well. And it's a lesson. It's Chof Menachemov. Today is the Yorzait of the Rebbe's father. The Rebbe made it his business to honor his father. The Rebbe made it his business to honor his father. The Rebbe made it his business to honor his mother. The Rebbe also showed incredible hakaras hatoiv, real hakaras hatoiv, to anybody who would honor his parents. It's an interesting thing. The Rebbe really was happy, and he took it. He considered it a personal gift when people named their children Levi, Yizchok, and Chana. It was for him a gift. And there's a story about a boy whose name was Levi Yizchok, and the Rebbe was very tough on him, and nobody could understand why the Rebbe was so tough on him. And the teretz was because he's carrying the Rebbe's father's name. The Rebbe felt a certain additional obligation towards him than he felt towards other people. The Rebbe was very appreciative of people who honored his parents on his behalf. So these are simple and real lessons. Not easy lessons. Kibbud av v'eim is lav dafka gringa mitzvah. I mean, some people look at me like, what am I talking about? Of course, kabbalah zevicha semecha. But there are people for whom kabbalah zevicha, and it's more than one or two, it's a difficult mitzvah. And it's one of the real lessons of Chof Menachemov, is the lesson of kibbud av v'eim, the way the Rebbe did everything to honor his parents. L'chaim tevim shalom, l'chaim v'levracha, l'chaim, 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 shalom aleichem, l'chaim everybody, l'chaim, l'chaim.
Ya 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 ya.
Special for this. They held the seat for you.
Okay, so come upstairs right away.
Paltiel. Rabbi, snap him.
Tausend alles on the Uhr. Und hier Yizchok koid mit derselbe Sache, derselbe Siege, derselbe Schwede. I don't want this to become a Musa speech, but I got haskama for my first drasha, so I have a second drasha. On the basis of that haskama, you should know that Api Teire, the tzedakah begins with the people closest to yourself. It says in pasuk, "Im kesef talves ami ani imach," that ani ircha koidmim, which means the person you have an obligation, Api Teire, to be kind to first, is the person closest to you in the world. Who's the person closest to you in the world? Forgive me for saying it. Your wife. Your wife. You have a chiyuv to be kind to your wife. It's a mitzvah. There's a story with Goldschmidt. Wie die heißen Menschen Namen seine? No.
Butcher?
Yeah. Schoenberg. It's a sweet story. He tells the story in a video that he married a Weinberg. He married Yosef Weinberg's niece, Rabbi Weinberg's niece. She was a true Yisayma. She had nothing, not a father, not a mother, not a brother. Her only living relative was Rabbi Weinberg. Rabbi Weinberg was a ganze, like it says in the Ketuvim, a ganze possessor. He had an apartment and a wife who was a ganze Matthias. He also didn't have anything, but at least he had a shtick mishpocha. He had a Rebbe. She came after the war and she was by them. And there was a shidduch arranged. He had no parents. His parents were killed in Parois of Peites. Yeah, his parents were killed in Hebron. He was a real Yosef. And she was a real Yosema. So there was an arrangement for a shidduch. Anyway, during the course of their courting, they were really not up to date. They met in Rabbi Weinberg's living room. They didn't know you have to go to a hotel. And they were smarter than us, to be honest. They met in Weinberg's living room. People left them alone. They didn't tell the whole world, and that's how they met. And at one of the conversations, he said to her that he wants very much that the Rebbe should officiate at the wedding. And the condition for the Rebbe to officiate at the wedding were two conditions. That he has to wear a beard, and she has to wear a sheitel. The Rebbe didn't ask for a kapata, a bard. He wanted him to wear a beard, and she should wear a sheitel. So she says, I'm not putting on a sheitel. You're talking 1950, 51. None of the girls wore sheitlach. They covered their hair. They wore hats. The Rebbe wanted a sheitel. And the Rebbe said it was going to be Mesa Nefesh. The Rebbe had no problem with a beautiful sheitel. I want you to know. The Rebbe didn't mind if the sheitel looked beautiful. I don't know the pretty pratim, but I don't think he minded if it looked like natural hair. But the Rebbe wanted a sheitel. He didn't want women walking outside with hats and tichlach. The Rebbe wanted a sheitel. He didn't care how beautiful it was. And in those days, none of the girls wore sheitlach. So he says, if you're not going to wear a sheitel, the Rebbe's not going to decide the condition. She says, no way of putting on a sheitel. Anyway, this became an impasse. So after that meeting, I forgot all the details. He went to Rabbi Weinberg, Rabbi Weinberg talked to her. Bottom line is, he went into the Rebbe. In those days, between every date, he went to the Rebbe to discuss the last meeting. And he told the Rebbe that she doesn't want to wear a sheitel. So the Rebbe's not going to decide the condition and say he doesn't want to marry her. And the Rebbe looked at him and said, what about Abbas Yisrael? Abbas Yisrael. You have to love every Jew. You have to care about what she needs also. That's what the Rebbe told him. Anyway, when they met the next time, so she became very upset. She started to cry, and he says, look at me, I'm an orphan, have nobody in the world. And now you don't want to marry me either, because I'm not going to put on a sheitel. He says, what are you talking about? He didn't tell her that the Rebbe told him to tell her this. He just told her, no. It says in the Torah, it doesn't have to be only to strangers. It could be to the person who's going to be your wife as well. If you can't wear a sheitel, then you won't wear a sheitel. She says, but if I'm not going to wear a sheitel, the Rebbe won't be Mitzvah Kedushin wedding. So he says, the Rebbe, so you're prepared to be Mavater on the Rebbe Mitzvah Kedushin because of Haftar Lechamecha? So he said, yeah. So she says, you know what? If that's the case, I'll put on a sheitel. There's pictures of the Rebbe Kedushin. Why? Why? To give tzedakah to a stranger is not difficult. To be kind to people closest to ourselves, just like parents. Whether it's our wife, or our husband, or it's our parents, or it's our children, or it's our siblings. We have cheshbonis, we have mountains and mountains and mountains of calculations, and memories, and counter-memories, and counter-memories. There's so many reasons why. It's not the pshat I don't like him, but he doesn't like me as much as I like him. So b'meila, it's going to be not fair. And we get all entangled, and we have difficulty being kind to the people closest to ourselves. And just like is one of the easiest mitzvahs in the Torah, and people struggle with it. We struggle with being kind to the people closest to ourselves, beginning with our spouse. And like I said, somebody told me that he liked my speech about Kibbud Avim, so I'm mentioning this as well. You have to understand that when the Eibusha gave us a mitzvah of a half l'lech kamaycha, it's not conditional. It doesn't come along with an asterisk. You're going to be kind so that. Hashem gave us these mitzvahs. And if we learn how to be kind to the people closest to ourselves, in the end we also benefit. It's right. And being kind to the people close to ourselves means to farkuken, to overlook, to accept. I think the biggest thing is to accept the people close to ourselves. We have many children, Baruch Hashem, or whatever number of children the Eibusha gives us. Unfortunately, not all of our kids are the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Some of them are quite interesting, yeah? And you wished your child would be different, as if we're such big tzaddikim, and as if we're such great rocket scientists, and such great people, but we expect. And one of the most critical components of our relationship with the people closest to ourselves is whatever the Eibusha gave me is good, to accept. It's a big mitzvah, and it's the right thing to do, and it needs to be mentioned. So I'm following up my Kibbud Avim drasha with the Haftar Lecha Kamaycha. L'chaim v'lebracha. L'chaim. I want to talk about the Rebbe's father. A minute. A little about the Rebbe's father. A paar minutes wegen dem Rebbe's Tat, and then we'll sing again.
We have more chairs available inside. Please come in. If you are sitting, you're going to be much more into the Farbrengen. I'm telling you. Boduk menuse. You're taking a chair, you're part of the Farbrengen, you're coming home, you have much more.
You have a harder time getting out. That's the
yeah.
Way. The Rebbe's father, Rebbe Leivik, was an incredible meyuchas. He was a direct descendant of the Rebbe the Tzemach Tzedek. And he was from the Tzemach Tzedek's oldest son. Tzemach Tzedek had 7 sons and 2 daughters. The Mittler Rebbe had 7 daughters and 2 sons. The Tzemach Tzedek had 7 sons and 2 daughters. The oldest was Ravash, was Rabbi Baruch Shalom. That was his name, Rabbi Baruch Shalom. This oldest son of the Tzemach Tzedek, the Ravash, was old enough to have had a relationship with the Alter Rebbe, The second son, Rabbi Yehuda Leib, the Mariel, who probably was the most famous of the Tzemach Tzedek's sons, he knew the Alter Rebbe. But he was a chasser of the Mittel Rebbe. He didn't have that relation with the Alter Rebbe. The Ravash, the oldest son, the Rebbe's father, Rabbi Leivik's, father's grandfather, his great grandfather, the Rebbe's great grandfather knew the Alter Rebbe. When Alter Rebbe was nostalgic, he was only 7 or 8, but he was an Eloi. He was a prodigy. He wasn't an ordinary child. And in addition to his incredible mind, he was apparently a very, very deep neshama. He was very the Tzemach Tzedek's bchor, the Ravash, and he had a very, very strong relationship with Alter Rebbe. He had an incredibly strong relationship with Alter Rebbe, the Ravash. And it's known about this relationship, different things. Apparently the Alter Rebbe taught him things that he didn't teach other people. And the Friedrich Rebbe writes in the Siches that when the Alter Rebbe was nostalgic, he was 7 or 8. And his whole life, there was a sadness about him. There was a certain sadness in his countenance because he never recovered from the passing of his great-grandfather. Alter Rebbe was his elder Zayde. But that's how kind of a connection he had to Ravash. He was the oldest of the Tzemach Tzedek's children. He was like tzaddik and a gon and a kodesh and a shoisek. He never spoke. He was very quiet. He was a balmum. He was physically disfigured. He was missing fingers on his left hand. He didn't have fingers on his left hand. And there's a story about it, Derech Agav. The story is that when Alter Rebbe was Aleres Devoid, Alter Rebbe in the last days of his life, Alter Rebbe was in a village called Piene. Piene was a village, was not a single Jew. No Jews lived in the village of Piene. It was in eastern Russia. It was very goyish. And the Alter Rebbe's family rented space in the house of a goy. There's a story about that also. The bottom line is the Mittel Rebbe wasn't there. The Mittel Rebbe was not. Well, Alter Rebbe was nostalgic. The Mittel Rebbe was not around because he went to Kremenchuk to buy homes for the Alter Rebbe to relocate and so on because the war was finishing. So the person who was with the Alter Rebbe those last few days was his grandson, the Rebbe the Tzemach Tzedek. And there are many stories that are known about. He had for 5 days. The Alter Rebbe was ill. He passed away once the Shabbos Kedesh Pasha Shmeis, Erlich of Dalat Tevis, Tov Kufay Gimel. Anyway, so during this last period, Alter Rebbe's life, the Alter Rebbe turned to the Tzemach Tzedek, who was 22 years old at the time, and he said to him, he called him by his first name. He says, Mendel, do you have any shilas in halacha? Do you have any questions in Nigla de Teira that you need to resolve? Do you have any questions in halacha that you want to talk over? And the Tzemach Tzedek said he didn't. No, he couldn't think of what the Alter Rebbe could possibly mean. And apparently the Alter Rebbe asked him more than once. When it came to the Ravash's bar mitzvah, and the Tzemach Tzedek had a shaila about tefillin, because he didn't have fingers. And when you put on the tefillin shal yad, the fingers are very, very important. You have to put it on the kibbutz over here by this muscle. And the second most important place is fingers. And he Pasha did not have fingers. In the Tzemach Tzedek's tshuvas, there are a number of tshuvas about this shaila that he wrote in conjunction Pashat with his own son. This was the Ravash. He lived his whole life in Lubavitch. He passed away in Lubavitch and he's buried in Lubavitch. And they have a marker for him. They have a tziyun for him. In Lubavitch, near the oil, the Ravash, the Baruch Shalom. And the story was that the Tzemach Tzedek had said to his oldest son, that he shouldn't be a Rebbe. According to halacha, api halacha, if a person has many children, and they're worthy of being Mamala Makayim Aviyim, they're deserving of succeeding their father in any position, any shirada, any position of leadership. They have a halachic precedence over others, and a firstborn more than any of the other children. So the Ravash was Roy, so yet still the Ravash was a big man, a great person, and the Tzemach Tzedek said to his oldest son, you shouldn't be a Rebbe, and he told him that if you're not going to be a Rebbe, you'll get Pishnayim. You'll get what's coming to you as the firstborn. According to Jewish law, a firstborn son gets twice what all the other children get from the estate. It means money, it means a financial double piece. But the Tzemach Tzedek at the Soid Gitach Beruchni, he says, I promise you, Pishnayim, you're twice as much all the other brothers. And then he said to him, V'doy Revi Yoshevu Heina, it'll come back to your family in 4 generations. And they knew it. In the mishpacha of the Ravash, this was known. That means the children, the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren knew the story. That Tzemach Tzedek had said to their Zayde, to the Ravash, to the Baruch Shalom, that he shouldn't be a Rebbe, and that in 4 generations, he'll get his double portion, it'll be in 4 generations around. So the Rebbe Leivik also knew this. The Rebbe Leivik knew this, and the Rebbe Leivik was 4 generations from the Tzemach Tzedek. So there's rumors. I don't know how true the rumors are that the Rebbe Leivik felt that he should be a Rebbe. The bottom line is Rebbe Leivik was not a Rebbe. But when the Rebbe was engaged to be married to the Rebbetzin, when our Rebbe got engaged to be married to the Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka, so Rebbe Leivik said that he miscalculated 4. You don't count 4 from the Tzemach Tzedek. You count 4 from the Baruch Shalom, and he was satisfied. So this is Rebbe Leivik. Rebbe Leivik knew that from him is going to come the Nasi of Chabad, the Nasi of the whole world, the Rebbe. And it's a davar yedua. It's known. Again, this is something which these are things which you hear. Rebbe Leivik was very proud. He was very proud of the fact that he was mechutn of the Frierdiker Rebbe. He was the Frierdiker Rebbe's mechutn. They shared children. And when he would meet Lubavitch Chassidim, which was quite frequently, he would tell them that he's the mechutn and that his son is the next Rebbe. Now, the fact that he was the mechutn of the Rebbe was a reason to give him kavod. But when he would add that his son is the next Rebbe, this Chassidim didn't like that at all. This was like blasphemy. This is like the worst thing. Everybody knows that Rebbe lives forever. Every Rebbe is Mashiach. And the Chassidim didn't like it. But this was Rebbe Leivik. He would tell all the Chassidim that his son is going to be the next Rebbe. This is Rebbe Leivik.
This is why he stood up for the Rebbe.
So the Zeifel Kashes. Anyway, but the story of Rebbe Leivik's life is as follows. His father was Rabbi Shneir Zalman. His father's name actually was Shneir Zalman. But he married a girl whose father was also Shneir Zalman. I think the mishpacha name was Chaikin. If somebody can correct me, you'll correct me. Rebbe Leivik's maternal last name was Chaikin, and Rebbe Leivik's maternal grandfather's name was Shneir Zalman. And it says in the Tzavos of Ridach Chosid that you do not marry a girl if her father has the same name you have, and you don't marry a boy if. And the same is true with a mother, right? A daughter and a daughter-in-law and a mother are supposed to have the same name. So the minig is that you add a name. So his name was Shneir Zalman. When he got married, he became Baruch Shneir Zalman. Eventually, he became Baruch Shneir. The Zalman got somehow lost, but his name was actually originally the Rebbe's paternal grandfather. His father's name was actually Shneir Zalman originally, but he married a Yid, a girl whose father's name was also Shneir Zalman. So he added the name Baruch. The Rebbe's father was Baruch, so Baruch Shneir Zalman became Baruch Shneir. The Baruch Shneir, people describe him. Yudel Chitzik described him. People describe what kind of a Jew he was. He kept a journal. He kept a journal of all his trips to Lubavitch, a diary. And in the 20s, when he was an old man already, he brought his journal to the Frierdiker Rebbe and he gave it to him as a gift. The journal that he kept of all of it, it's very interesting. They printed this journal. The journal of the Rebbe's paternal grandfather is published. You can read it. And there's some entries about the Rebbe. There's some entries about the Rebbe also in the journal from the Rebbe's father's father. And one of the things he writes in the journal was, this Rebbe Shneir, is that I never had a job. He never worked. He was what they call a B'nai Tevim. You have in Chazal, B'nai Tevim. He was a Yid, there was a Gaon and a Tzaddik and a Kaddish who sat Kol Yom of Al Terev Al Aveda. The Rebbe Rashab used to give him a stipend. Rebbe Leivik's father, the Rebbe Rashab, gave him Geld of Gehalt. He pushed gave him money he should live. You have in the Chazal that in the Beis Hamikdash there was a Lishkas Chashoyin. Lishkas Chashoyin was a secret fund. The Rebbe had also Lishkas Chashoyin. Lishkas Chashoyin means a fund where the Rebbe raised money, and where the money went was nobody's business. And it says in Chazal that a Lishkas Chashoyin shemimenu mispanesim aniyim b'nei tevim. There were certain people, not people who want to live on government assistance, but people that are on very high madreg of Terev Aveda, that they don't work, not chas v'shalom because they're lazy, because they're always in a ma'amad matzav of Shabbos, and it's a special schus oisterhalten to support them. And this was Rebbe's paternal grandfather was in that category. He never held a position as a Rav. He was Rebbe Shneir. Yudel Chitrik describes how they were on a train once, traveling Mistamet Rostov. And it was a long trip, it went on all night. And the Rebbe Shneir he describes his personality. He was pushed a freilich chassidische Yid. He was a happy, open, precocious chassid, but he was a god. He was an incredible mind. And they're sitting on the train, a whole bunch of chassidim, and the Baruch Shneir says, we're sitting together. Someone should Chazir Chassidus, someone should say a Maimach Chassidus. Who knows a Maimach Chassidus as on the top of his... So he Chazir a Maimach Chassidus, whatever time it took. Anyway, he finished Chazir Maimach Chassidus, they sang a couple of Monagunim. He said, that's a blach noch a bissel. And the Baruch says, no, Chassidim are sitting together on a train. Someone should Chazir Chassidus. So he Chazir the second Maimon, he Chazir the third Maimon. This was who he was. He was an incredible, incredible mind. So he writes in his journal, what the Baruch does, he says, the Rebbe never got me a job. But for my boys, he found an abundance. For my children, he found jobs. The Rebbe's father, Reb Leivik, and his brother, he got, the Rebbe Rashab found them in abundance. And to be candid, if you understand the life that was going on in Russia, the greatest favor that Rebbe Rashab did to the Baruch was that he didn't find him a job. Rabbonos Bechlal, the Rabbonos in Russia then was such an impossible task. And the Rebbe Rashab didn't give Reb Leivik a Rabbonos because he wanted to give him a job. The Rebbe Rashab gave Reb Leivik a Rabbonos because he was necessary, he was needed for the job that he gave him. When Reb Leivik got married, so he lived by his in-laws. That was the shteg in the olden days. You got married, you moved into your in-laws' home. Today a couple has to get an apartment and all the other kind of things. In those days you got married, you got a bedroom. That's what you got. You moved into your wife's parents' home and you lived. And they got along. They didn't eat each other up alive, and they didn't have problems with father-in-law and son-in-law and mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. Somehow the laws of nature were defied. That's how it was. A couple got married. They were very young when they got married. And the Rebbe's parents got married. They were around 20. But a couple got married. They got a bedroom in her parents' home, and they could live there for years. And the shviger used to raise the grandchildren. The first grandchildren raised by the mother. The girl didn't know anything. She was a kid. And that's how Seder was. Rabbi Leivik sat in his parents' house for about a decade. He had nothing to do with the world. And then the Yekatinus Lavarov passed away. The Ben of Wolf and Yekatinus Lavarov passed away. And the Rebbe Rashab wanted very much that Rabbi Leivik should take that Rabbonos. Okay, I'm going to make an Iberite. Yeah? But you know that the Rebbe's father has a niggin. The Rebbe's father has a niggin. It's a Hakofas niggin. And the Rebbe liked it very, very much. And I'm gonna give you a little bit of background, especially because there's people here who may not have personal recollections of this. When the Rebbe got his hakofa, the first hakofa and last hakofa, Simchas Torah, there was a special hakofas niggin. I don't know where this niggin came from, but we always sang the same niggin by the Rebbe's hakofas. Wait, let me finish. Nice finish there, yeah. In Tofshin Nun Aleph, I'm almost sure it was Nun Aleph. The seventh hakofa, I forgot it was Shmini Atzah Simchas Torah. The Rebbe had the Sefer Torah. By this point, you understand, the Rebbe was dancing alone. The Rashag had already passed. The Rebbe was dancing alone. The Rebbe came to the middle of the shul, and the Rebbe started singing his father's hakofas niggin. This was the niggin the Rebbe sang. And from then on, that was the niggin of hakofas. It was earlier than that?
I had no idea.
Mir dachte, dass ich enough. Efter. Huh? Yeah, I know, but we still sang the old niggin. Wait, let me just finish the whole introduction.
Yeah, I don't know when this started.
Mir dachte, dass ich enough. I remember it was the seventh hakofah. The other thing is, another place where you saw how the Rebbe was honoring his father was Shabbos by Farbrengen. The Seder was that the Rebbe said, usually he said 2 sichos. Each sich was approximately half an hour, 35 minutes. After the 2 sichos, there was a maimer. The maimer was very short. Shabbos says the maimer was short. 10 minutes. 15 minutes was a long maimer. 6 minutes, a short maimer. After the maimer, you saw something very interesting. That the Rebbe would open up a chumash, and he would prepare the chumash. This is the only time the Rebbe ever prepared. The Rebbe came to Farbrengen with notes. You know, the Rebbe had sometimes notes in the back of his siddur. There are even occasions where you would see the Rebbe open up the back of his siddur and look at his notes. The Rebbe had a strip of notes that he wrote for some Farbrengen inside the rubber bands in the back of his siddur. You can see films, even weekday Farbrengen, where the Rebbe opens back and looks at his notes. But B'shas Maaseh and the notes, you look at the notes, the notes didn't say anything. They just said what he wants to talk about. There was no Maramakemis, there was no Gemaras, there was no... The Torah was not in the notes. Just push at the points that he wanted to talk about. Anyway, the only thing that Rebbe prepared b'shas Farbrengen was the Rashi. After the Maimer, every Shabbos, the Rebbe would open up a Chumash and he would prepare the Rashi. Then he would close the Chumash and he would open up his father's commentary on Zohar. I mentioned to you before that the Rebbe said Chumash Rashi in the schus of his mother. And Derech Hagav, that after the first year, 1965, Tafshin Chof, the Rebbe Farbrengen every single Shabbos, and the Farbrengen revolved around the Rashi. He spoke every single Shabbos, the first Rashi in the Parsha, and the last Rashi in the Parsha. And it was dominated the Farbrengen. I wasn't born yet, so I don't remember this, you understand? But you could see it in the Sichos. The Farbrengen was Rashi. After a year, he stopped. And there was a Yid whose name was Rabbi Yosef Waldman. He wasn't even a Lubavitcher officially. And he begged the Rebbe to continue. Waldman, I'm sorry.
Goldman, he said.
Yeah, and the Rebbe continued. The label Shapiro's Gesundheit in his broadcasts remembers the Shabbos and the Rebbe resumed the Rashis in Tafshin Chavov. I'm sorry.
Used to tell him what's Rashi.
Right, there's another story. Anyway, so the Rebbe learned every Shabbos a Rashi in schus of his mother, and in schus of his father he would learn a piece. The Rebbe's father wrote notes on Zohar, but he wrote his notes on the margin of the Zohar. He didn't have any paper, so the notes are very cryptic. And the Rebbe would study these notes. They just gave out now, this year they gave out 5 volumes, Teferes, Levi Yizchok, all the Sichos of the Rebbe that explain the Rebbe's father's notes on Zohar. And every single week, the Rebbe would read one piece, he would prepare, but he would do this by the Farbrengen. He would actually open up the Sefer, read it, and this is what the Rebbe did after the Maimer. Now just, again, parenthesis within parenthesis, one of the things that stands out of my memory is the following. The Rashag, the Rebbe's brother-in-law, sat at the head of the table, right? The Rebbe sat in the middle of the table. Nobody sat next to him. The Rashag said at the head of the table, on the eastern end of the table, the Rebbe sat at the head of the table, the Rashag said. If Rashag had a reason to go over to the Rebbe, he went over right after the Maimer. Rashag, the Rebbe said Maimorim was called Ke'ein Sich. The Rebbe said a Maimer without a niggun, so we would all sit. The Rashag would stand up. If you remember, the Rashag would always stand up for the Maimorim. When the Rebbe finished the Maimer, the Rashag would walk over to the Rebbe with a bottle of mashke, whatever it is. So the timing was very bad because the Rebbe was actually looking in the Chumash, and the Rashag would walk over to the Rebbe. And in the later years, the Rashag, his balance was very poor, and you could watch him stagger. And when the Rebbe was looking in the Chumash, if you would drop an atom bomb, he wouldn't raise his head. You could see the concentration. And the Rashag would stand, and of course he would not interrupt the Rebbe. And at one point, the Rebbe would sort of like become aware that there was a shadow, and he would abruptly turn, and he would do whatever business that Rashag wanted done, and then he would go back to the Chumash Rashi. So what happened then would be this. After the Rebbe made the preparations, the Rebbe would begin. That the minig is that every Shabbos we speak Pirshasha la Torah, and then we also speak my father's Biyurim on Zohar. And in the summertime, that would say we also speak on the Pirkei Avos. And during the 3 weeks or the 4 weeks till Chamishas B'Atzei, we also speak Beis HaBchira from the Rambam. And then once the Rebbe made the Lakon of Rambam, he would also speak every Shabbos at Rambam. So the Rebbe would speak about 20 minutes. A short sikha, relatively speaking. And he would introduce the Chumash. And it's you have to listen to the tapes, but listening to the Rebbe present an idea had a clarity that was just unbelievable. It was just so special. You wish your Rosh Hashiva had 100th the skill. When the Rebbe delivered a Rashi or a Rama, but to tell you what's written there before he asked his questions, it was so crystal clear. So the Rebbe used to present the Chumash. He would say what Rashi said, and then would Rebbe ask a bunch of questions. And then the Rebbe would say, Ukafi sheyizbaya lakama. I'll explain later. Then he would say, Ubenegei to the beauty Azayah of my father. The Rebbe usually in my years was makatzer. In the early years was more maidich. The Rebbe would say that my father says, it says in Zayah such and such, my father makes this and this comment, and usually the Rebbe would say, my father does not write what the lesson of Avodas Hashem is. And the reason was, because he didn't have enough paper. And he trusted that we're going to figure out the Hira by ourselves. So we have to know what's the lesson from these few lines in Kabbalah, the way the Rebbe's father explained the Zayah. And the Rebbe would say again, And then would say, but again to the Rambam, same thing. Over like four in the summertime, you could have 5 different topics. He would present, he would choose a halacha and a Rambam, he would recite the halacha by heart, and the Rambam the Rebbe didn't prepare b'shas ma'aser. Only the Chumash and the Zayir. He would present the Rambam and he would ask his questions, and he would say, and he would very often say, Vestach, L'yasher ha'deis, he would bring the Lashonos from the Rambam, that what's the lesson in Avodas Hashem, using Rambam's choices of words, Tikkun ha'deis and so forth, and he would say again, U'kafi she'ez b'hai l'kam, and then he would do it for Pirkei Avos, and then he would do it for Beis HaBchira. And then the Rebbe would say that there are people here, this was standard, this was every Shabbos, there are people in my decade, I don't know the 40 years, I know the few years I was in yeshiva, that would say that there's people here who have special occasions. So say Rufke and Lamaila, they should come up and they should take mashke from the Farbrengen, and the Rebbe would ask them to give you a little bit of the mashke during the Farbrengen, so there shouldn't be a shadow of Meichem Shabbos Ochel, and they should announce what it's about. And people would line up, and the Rebbe would give them mashke. It was always prepared from before. You had to go into Rabbi Groner and bring them the bottle of mashke before Shabbos, and the Rebbe would give you mashke, and you had to announce what your issue was. So there was a huge break. It was like a 15-minute break. It was the longest interruption in the Farbrengen was this break. Because the Rebbe was giving mashke, it could be 25 people. It takes time. The Rebbe has to, in the early years, the Rebbe used to pour the mashke into his becher, and then pour the becher back into the bottle. Then he would close the bottle and shake it. And then he would reopen it, and he would pour for you, and then you had to say l'chaim, and then you had to announce what it was about, and the Rebbe would give you the brach bottle. Each person, later on, they prepared it. After Memches, the Rebbe did it before the Farbrengen. You could see the mashke bottles already had wine inside them. The Rebbe did it before. But until the Rebbe passed away, it took 15 minutes of Farbrengen. All over the shul, you see chaburis, groups of bachrim, young light, all talking. Because the Rebbe left us with so many questions. Here they're talking on the Rashi, and they're talking on the Rambam, and it almost seemed, and I think it was not just by mistake, the Rebbe Poshet wanted us to have a chance, but from between that he asked the questions until they gave the answers, that we should think about it. This took 10, 15 minutes, it took time. And then the Rebbe would start to sing Varikei Lochem Bracha. This was Varikei Lochem Bracha, and then there would be the next sikha. And this sikha could be an hour, the longest sikha of the Farbrengen. The Rebbe would go back, and he revisit the Rashi, and he would answer the questions, and he would go over each point, and so on. This was the Seder. So I shared, all of this I shared because I wanted to share it with you. Yeah. But the point of it all is that in Tafshin Mem Tes, the Rebbe changed. For most of the years of the Rebbe's Nesias, the Rebbe would give mashke, and then he would sing Varikei Lochem Bracha. In Tafshin Mem Tes, sometime in the summer, the Rebbe starts singing his father's Zakafas Ding. So we're going to, after all of this talking in circles, new. Ay 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 ay
als Punkt, was gibt, das soll nehmen. Und der Rebbe, לתת לי, אז ראיתי שלהגיד לחיים לפני ההכרזה. אז הרב התחיל לתת לי, אז זה בגללו אבל הרב התחיל יוסי בוטניק בוטניק. הרב התחיל יוסי בוטניק, זה רeingegangen. Der weiter mit dir geben, dann habe ich aber Buch הזה. אז פעם אמרתי לי יוסי בוטניק ש... Please, Moshe wants to say something. Hey, yeah, take the mic, Moshe. Chaim lechaim. Moshe, take the mic. Moshe wants to share something with us.
Martin came with what he said. He spoke about it of his brother, whom
Paltiel.
the kibbutz aim that Rebbe had his mother. So just a story. Yizchok Tashalam. It's on tape, okay? It was on Wednesday, and this professor came by, the Rebbe, Professor Rosenblum, and the Rebbe gave him a paper, a mathematical paper to finish, and the Rebbe, he said to the Rebbe, the person who wrote it has to finish it. And the Rebbe said, it's kind of a little impossible because the person who wrote it passed away already. And Paltiel, the Rebbe told him, that was my brother. And he said to the Rebbe, your brother? The Rebbe said, yes. And then the Rebbe said, he passed away 10 years ago.
More than 10
More than
years
10 years
ago.
ago. So he said 10 years ago, and the Rebbe said approximately. Yud Gimel Iyah touching Yud Bais until Yud Shvat touching Lamed Hey, a little more than 10 years. But maybe what you could say is, Vav Tishrei Tashon Chof Hey was approximately 10 years before Yud Shvat Tashon Lamed Hey. And when I heard that, it hit me like a ton of bricks. Until then I thought that the Rebbe was fooling his mother. Apidin, Apitein, Apiolach, that was allowed to. But when the Rebbe said that, it hit me, the Rebbe is an Isha Emes. The Rebbe doesn't know how to fool anyone. He just doesn't know how to do it. As long as the Rebbe's mother was alive, the Rebbe's brother was alive. Maybe you could say, like, how? I don't know. But maybe you could say, like it says Pashas Vayigash, the Yehuda said to Yosef, that as long as Binyamin is alive, everything is fine. If Yaakov thinks Binyamin died, it's like he lost Yaakov, it's like he lost Rachel, Yosef, and Binyamin on the same day. So the Rebbe was able to keep his brother alive as long as his mother was alive. Because the Rebbe doesn't fool anyone. That's one thing. The other thing was, he said about the Rebbe Tzimchana, that look at what my son, like, he keeps the people together. Right? Something like that. What did you say? The Rebbe Tzimchana, she stood out and saw the young couples. They keep saying, yeah. So just like, I don't know, I may think about this. There's a video of the Friedrich Rebbe's Levaya, and you see men and ladies standing together. You see the picture, you see it, see it on video. And I watched it one night, Yud Shvat, one night in the street bowl, and afterwards I saw Mendel Hershka. And I said to him, what's going on over here? Men and ladies standing together for Friedrich Rebbe's Levaya? And he gave me a very interesting answer. He says, Meisha, it was about 6 years after World War II. We were a broken people. And Nasi Yisrael was just Nifter. We were just standing together. And that's it, just 2 hours.
L'chaim, everybody. L'chaim levrach. Nuzok l'chaim.
Chaim.
If a person drinks alone, he's a drunk. If somebody drinks with him, then he's a chassid. Or a community drunk. Drunk b'chavruse. L'chaim levrach. L'chaim levrach. It's well known that the Rebbe Rashab said, it's well known that the Rebbe Rashab said that when Mashiach comes, he will take 3 chassidim by the hand, 3 people, he'll introduce them to Mashiach, imagine the tziyah, introduce them to Mashiach, and he will say, Re'u gidulim shegidalti, look what I reared, look what I raised. So the way the story is told, the first one is Reb Mendel Chaim. Reb Mendel Chaim was the Nezhin Rav, the Rav in Nezhin. I was in Nezhin. He has a tziyah, he has a grave. He was murdered al Kiddush Hashem. He was killed in the price of Ayin Tes. He passed away. He was 39 years old. He was before the Rebbe Rashab passed away. The Mendel Chaim was a Gon Adir in Nigle, a Mishugan Gon, and he was a real chassid. He was a Chaim. After Shneerson is Chaim. I'm not a Chaim, so I can say it. It's true. Mishpachas, half Lubavitch is Chaim, or more than half Lubavitch is Chaim. He was the son of the Radat. He was a very big chassid. He was a very big Gon. And he was the Rebbe Rashab's mouth. When they would have Sifas HaRabbonim, when there were these big meetings of Rabbonim, even if the Rebbe was sitting there, the Rebbe didn't talk. Mendel Chaim would speak. He was a young man. He passed away at 39. He was a Gon Oilam, Mendel Chaim. The second was Reb Zalman Shneerson from Lodz. Reb Zalman Lodger, they called him. I don't know very much about him. He passed away right before the Holocaust, and he was an old man. He was an elder that did. Rabbi Greenglass from Montreal was a makabel of his. Rabbi Greenglass from Montreal, his chassidus came from Reb Zalman Lodger, Reb Zalman Shneerson. We lost, one of the many people we lost over the last few months, was Rabbi Shvei. And Rabbi Shvei tells a story, and I'm repeating the story very, very poorly, but I'm relying on the fact that there's a tape. You can hear Rabbi Shvei telling the story that when they were in Poking after the war, so all the Lubavitchers were in one row. They had barracks. Poking was a deep displaced people's camp. That's what it was. It was essentially an army, whatever it was during the war. It was a barracks, and there were rows and rows of these large rooms. And every community got a number of barracks. All the Lubavitchers lived together, all of the Paltiel lived together, and so on. And so the Anash all lived together in Poking, and there was one Farbrengen, and 2 Yidden came in. They were not frum. 2 Yidden came in, and there was a Chassidish Farbrengen, Lubavitcher Farbrengen, a Chassidish Farbrengen, so they joined, and they came from Lodz. And they knew Reb Zalman Lodger, Reb Zalman Shneerson. Rabbi Shvei tells the story, and Rabbi Shvei sings the niggin. He actually sings the niggin. So the 2 of them got up, and they began to sing a tnuah that Reb Zalman Lodger was singing. And they were not frum. They had gone through Shivim Adura Gehenim. They went through the war, and at that point in their lives, they were not frum. And they began to sing how their mashpia, how Reb Zalman Lodger would sing. And Rabbi Shvei describes the emotion. 2 boys who had been Chassidish Bachrim, who had gone through who knows what, and they were broken in body and in spirit, went back in their memory to the best of the zeit, how their lives were. They were repeating and nigging from their Rebbe, from their mashpia, and they were crying uncontrollably. Rabbi Shvei describes it. For those who don't know, they gave out a sefer for Rabbi Shvei. I don't know if it's an actual book or it's a PDF, but I have the book and I read much of it. It's like 100 pages of stories. This is one of the stories. Reb Zalman Shneerson of Lodz. He was an Einik from the Middle Rebbe. His yichas I don't know b'diuk, but he was a very big makubal. So the Mendel Chaim was a big Bal Nigle, and Reb Zalman Lodz was a big makubal. And the third was the Rebbe's father, Reb Leivik, or as they called him in Lubavitch, Leivik. And because the Rebbe's father was great in Niglan and Ister. And there's a story about Leivik also. What's the story about Hakdama? I'm sorry I'm digressing, but if I was sorry I wouldn't digress. So I'm digressing on purpose. I'm just pointing it out. That the Rebbe said once in the Farbrengen, I remember it. I think I remember it. That when I was growing up, I couldn't understand. The Rebbe said, G'dei Chassidim, great Chassidim, who were Evdei Elikim, and Gewaldige Talmidei Chachamim, and Chassidim called them by their name. And the Rebbe gave a dogma from the Radatz, Hirschel derov, Hirschel Chenigever. Hirschel Chenigever, the Radatz, was in Madregas Tzadik, not Madregas Beinani. He was Madregas Tzadik. It's brought in Svarim that the Rebbe Marash hat gesagt, es ist Zeit zu trachten wegen Avedes HaTzadikim. The Radatz was in Madregas Tzadik. And Chassidim called him Hirschel. They didn't call him Hirschel derov. So the Rebbe said, how could you call a person of such a stature by a nickname? Not even his proper name, Rebbe Hirschel. So what the Rebbe said, the Rebbe answered the question, a little different than the word I'm going to tell you. The Rebbe answered the question by saying that that it says in the Torah, every chassid sees his Rebbe all the time, and you're not allowed to give cover to a Talmud in the presence of the Rav. So since by Hasidim, the Rebbe's countenance was always present, so other people, as great as they may have been next to the Rebbe, were Hirschel. That's what the Rebbe said in the Farbrengen. But the story that I want to share, when you get to the Rebbe's father, the Leivik, is this. It's printed in a sefer which is called Zichrei Noisai. It's a biography of a chassid whose name was Reb Nachum Shmayos Hasonkin, B'Shmerel Derov. He lived in Yerushalayim. Du gedenkst hem? Gewann am Hush, gewann a Zier. Gewann sehr a Sheiner. He was a very big lamb. He was a big Talmud Chacham. And he was a big chassid. And he came to Yerushalayim after the war, and he did big things. In a lot of ways, he wasn't stuck. And a lot of the Elter Chassidim came to Israel. It was like they were just retired. He was youthful. He wrote books. He was a brilliant writer. He wrote beautifully. So he tells a story. Shmuel Batuma tells a story that he was a bocher. He was a bocher. It must have been the 1910s or even the 1900s. And the seder was that the bochrim were the fundraisers. The bochrim was sent, Elter the bochrim was sent by this. All the yeshivas in Russia did this. They would send bochrim from place to place to raise money for the yeshiva. And of course, they were the perfect advertisement. If you wanted to raise money for yeshiva, the people who you were soliciting the funds from got to look at a book and you say, simple. What Taim Chatmimim produced. So he was sent to raise money in Ekaterinslav, the Nempa Petrasim. So the address, and Ekaterinslav was the Rebbe's father, there was Lubavitch Chassidim, Schneerson. The Rebbe Leivik used to come to Lubavitch all the time. The Rebbe's father in Lubavitch a lot. He didn't bring his sons, ever, which is a story. But the Rebbe Leivik was in Lubavitch all the time. So they all knew him. So Reb Shmerel detailed, he tells the story that he came to the house of the Rebbe's parents, and he knocked on the door, and the Rebbe Chana opens the door. He was a boy of 17, 18, how old could he have been? And he says to the Rebbe's mother, Leivik is here. And she looked at him like she was prepared to ring him up. Excuse Leivik? My husband is Leivik? Leivik? She didn't say anything, but he saw that he planted a bad seed. And it never rotted. She never forgave him. Whenever she would see him, decades later, he saw that she's still upset with him because she called her husband Leivik. And it bothered him. So 40 years later, Mustama, she had a minig, the Rebbe's mother had a minig, that every year Chof Menachemov, she used to make a Farbrengen in her home. She would invite a few Chassidim, and they would say L'chaim, maybe they said Divrei Torah, and she would talk about her husband. So Reb Shmerel Batumer got himself invited to one of these Farbrengens. He made arrangements he should be invited. Anyway, he came into the house, and she looked at him with the same cross eyes. She still remembered that she called the Rebbe's father Leivik. And he sat down by the Farbrengen, and at a certain point, everyone took turns, so she asked permission to say something. So she said, yeah. So he said that it says in the Gemara, that Kol Rav mi Bavel, that if you lived in Chutz La'aretz, and you had smicha, whatever kind of smicha there was in Chutz La'aretz, you were called the Rav. Kol Rebbe mi Eretz Yisrael, If you lived in Eretz Yisrael, you were called Rebbe with a Yud. Then you had the head of the Sanhedrin, whatever it was, the Abbez, and the Nasa, they were called Rabbon. Like Rabbon Gamliel, Rabbon Shimon ben Gamliel, Rabbon. And then the Gemara says, Godel mi Rabbon Shmoy. The greatest Tanoim is not Rav, not Rebbe, not Rabbon, it's Hillel, it's Shammai, it's Abaye, it's Rava. So he quoted this Gemara, and he said that this explains why by Chassidim, even the greatest of Chassidim, they didn't say Harav, Reish Kol B'nei HaGoylo, HaGon, HaTzadik, HaChosed. They just simply said their name. He says, for example, Leivik. For example, Leivik. And he saw her forgive him. 40 years of a grudge. He watched her say, okay, I get it. It's good, we're good. He writes the story in his own biography, his own savior. Anyway, getting back to the Rebbe's father, Leivik, Reb Leivik, Rav Leivik. He was a Gon in Nigla, was going in Kabbalah. A Moedik Gon in Nigla, Moedik Gon in Kabbalah. And of course, his fanem in Kabbalah is staggering. The Rebbe Simchana describes this. The Rebbe's mother describes this. And in the documents, in the summer of 1991, the Tafshin Nun Aleph, the KGB was doing tshuva. Tchias HaMeisiv they couldn't figure out. I mean, all the people that they killed, to bring them back from the dead, there wouldn't be enough carbon in the world to account for all the people they killed. So they would give out the files of the people that they abused to their relatives. So a lot of Lubavitchers got files from parents and grandparents and great-grandparents who had been killed by the Stalin. It was an appeasement. It was you can't fix, but there was a tshuva. They were trying to do the right thing. And the Rebbe got his father's folder. The Rebbe got his father's journal. And I read it. They printed it in Chabad magazine. I can't imagine the Rebbe got too much nachas with it. It was the summer of 1991. It was very painful to read. Certain parts of it are quite painful. But one of the things that they reference is that the Rebbe's father had bookcases, not bookshelves, bookcases, whole bookcases of notebooks with handwritten Chiddushei Torah. The Rebbe's father was an incredibly prolific writer. Most of the writing that he did we don't have it. And they wrote in the file that they burnt it. The Rebbe said, I remember thinking at the time, the Rebbe saw the file, and it said in the file that they burnt it, and the Rebbe said, we'll still find it. The Rebbe knows best. And this is not only Das Elyon, this is not only Ruchnius, this is also Das Ta. A younger man told me that the Russians never burnt anything. They said they burnt, but everything is stacked and filed and labeled and whatever the word is, categorized, and it's someplace. The Rebbe said, the Rebbe's father was an incredibly prolific writer. And from the little bit that we have, the best example of the Rebbe's father's style of writing is in the letters that he wrote to the Rebbe. Because the letters that he wrote to the Rebbe, he wrote when he was in a normal life. His commentaries on the Zohar, his commentaries on the Mishnayos, the different Rishimis that he was telling you, he wrote on the margin. He had no paper. He wrote on the margins of his Sfarim. How big is the margin? And I don't know if you've ever seen it. You see these colors that Rebbe Chana prepared ink from different, you see pink herbs, you see fluorescent pink and a bright orange. It's really beautiful colors if you're a teenage girl, not if you're the Rebbe's father. But you can see on one page 4 or 5 different colors. It's very interesting. They showed it in the library. If you go into the Rebbe's library, they show it. You can see the original, how it looked. And I heard from people that when the Rebbe's mother was carrying these Rishimas, she had one concern, that the ink shouldn't fade before it got to her son. Her only concern was, Chas Hashem, she had no idea how good an ink maker she was. She was learning on the job. She hadn't made ink. She made ink. How long is ink going to last? Lapel, the ink is still there now. It's 80 years afterwards. But she was very concerned that the ink would fade. Anyway, so he was an incredible... And so where do you see the farnem of Rabbi Leivik, the breadth of his style in the letters that he writes to the Rebbe? Because that's written on paper. He had parchment paper, yeah? A letter, 20 pages, 30 pages, 40 pages. And you don't understand the word. The whole thing is code. Code, Kabbalah. I told somebody, there's a volume of letters from the Rebbe's father to the Rebbe. It's 300 pages. You can read the entire book in 15 minutes. I did it. I read the whole book in 15 minutes. How do you read a 300-page book in 15 minutes? I'll explain it. You'll understand right away. I'll give you an example. The Rebbe's father is writing a letter to the Rebbe and to the Rebbetzin. Oftentimes they're addressed to the two of them, and they're connected to special occasions. Yud Kislev, Yud Aleph Nissen, Yud Aleph Kislev is always a letter for the Yom HaChasana. There's special occasions. The Rebbe's father writes them letters, and the letter begins very ordinary, to my son and to my daughter-in-law, and she gives them brachas, and you see very painful in the early 1930s, in every letter he's giving them a bracha. For Zadachai v'Kayoma. And then he stops. You see, he just doesn't do it anymore. You see that and then viele Kinder kommen in derselbe Sache. Damit doch angedrückt der Beigris, der erste paar Jahre nach der Chasane, wünschen sie, and then they don't write it so much. So it's 4 lines, 5 lines. How many lines are you going to write? How you doing? And then the letter that stands out of my mind is, the Rebbe sent his father a pair of shoes. So after the 3 lines of bracha, it says Hana Olim, the shoes, parenthesis. Then you have 20 pages on the Kabbalah of shoes. And it goes, there. At the end of the 20 pages, there's the end of the parenthesis, Haim Tovim, period. Then he signs his name. It's so cute to see. He writes a letter, the letter's 6 lines. But he makes a reference to something and he goes off on a tangent. So he puts it in the middle of a sentence, you have a parenthesis. The parenthesis is like a whole book. Then there's the end of the parenthesis and finish the sentence. Hana Olim, Haim Tevim. In between Hana Olim and Haim Tevim is 15 pages. You see the breadth, the Bekiyas Retnish, how much he knew. But the Koyach HaChiddush, Reb Leivik was always, he was mamish, every time he opened his mouth, new material came out. And I say new, I don't mean new that he thought of it today. No one ever said it. And it's so much. We don't understand it. We don't understand it. It's beyond our understanding. To learn one of those letters is an exercise of weeks or months. But you have to understand, there's a lot of gematrias, but it's not only gematrias. It's Kabbalah, it's Higoyin, there's a lot of Nigla, a lot of Midrashim. It's written so concisely. It's so, you see the breadth of this person, how much was in his brain and how well organized it was, and how he builds gigantic palaces, and he builds them down to the plumbing. He doesn't miss a tile. It's so gargantuan. It's so big. So there's a story that goes with this, and the story that goes with this is that Reb Leivik was on Kabbalah. Reb Leivik can say Kabbalah. That was his thing. He would say Kabbalah. So I'll tell you 2 stories, yeah? We're talking about this point. The first story requires a shtickle agdom. The story is that the Rebbe Rashab wanted very, very much that the Rebbe's father should be the Rav of Yekatinoslav. The Rebbe, it was called still Yekatinoslav. The Rebbe Rashab wanted very much that the Rebbe's father should be Rav in Yekatinoslav. Yekatinoslav was a community of Jews that then, at the turn of the last century, was probably 150 years old, or even less, maybe 100 years old. The Jews living in this city. The founder of the Jewish community of Yekatinoslav was a rich man who knew how difficult lives of the Jewish people were in the shtetl, in the villages. So he had permission to live in the big city. He had a special permit. So he created phony businesses. He created fake businesses. A storefront, and behind the storefront is nothing. And he came to the government and he said he needs to hire employees that he trusts. He has to hire workers that he could trust. So they gave him permission to import Jews. He brought 400 mishpachas. Then, in times of Mitzvah, 400 mishpachas to live in Yekatinoslav. Klaimesh, they're all working for him. There was no work. But they were, if you live in a big city, there was opportunity. By the time that Rebbe's father became Rav, those 400 communities, 400 families, was tens of thousands of Jews. It was a very big, dynamic, diverse, politically intense place. It was powerful. It was not a fun rabbonis. Since the miyased of this kehil of Yidden was a Lubavitcher, he had come to the Mittel Rebbe for a Rov. And from that point on, whenever the Rav would pass away, whoever it was would come to the Rebbe, whichever Rebbe it was, the Mittel Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, and they would send him a new Rav. The Rav before Reb Leivik was called Rebbe Revolf. Rebbe Revolf, because Revnikov was his family name. They called him Ber Revolf Katrinislav. I heard him. He talked about him like as if he knew him. He passed away in 1909, Tafresh Samach Tes. And that's when the Rebbe became Rabbi. The Rebbe took his position. He was a chassid from Tzemach Tzedek. If I'll have time, I'll go back and tell you stories about this Rebbe Revolf. The Vart was by the time Rebbe Revolf passed away, the community was very divided. It was no longer a unified community. First of all, you had Pashat Frumen, Rachman al-San, not Frumen. For most of the history of Russia, most of the Yidden were Frum. The idea that they were not Frum Jews was a Chiddush. And there were a lot of Yidden who Nebuch, if they see the Shaynis and Meshunas, were not Frum anymore. And they didn't want the Frum Rav. They certainly didn't want a Rav as Frum as a Leivik, because a Rav in Russia had official sanction of the state. There was no separation of church and state. He was an officer of the government with a lot of power in a lot of ways, including taxes. The community, the Jewish community, is like you have today in Europe. They used to raise money, and the Rav oversaw those, they tax people. And the Rav oversaw those resources, and he put them where he wanted. So if the Rav is on your team, you can get the money to go where you want it to go. If the Rav is on the other team, the Rav is the other way he wants it. So there was a huge fight over succession. Who would be the Rebbe of Malach? And the Rebbe Rashab was Mesa Nefesh that to be a Lubavitcher Rav. He wanted Rebbe Levi. So the people came up with 101 reasons why Rebbe Levi wasn't qualified. He's too from. One of the excuses that he came up with, which frankly is quite a legitimate excuse, was that all Rebbe Levi's smichas were from Chassidish Rabbanim. A Chassidish Bacha with a smich of Chassidish Rav is like me. I'm a Chassidish young man with a smich of Chassidish Rav. It's a rachmanas on the institution of smicha, my smicha. I have it sitting in one of my volumes in the Shulchan Aruch. I don't even know which. I would never hang it on my wall. It's embarrassment to my wall. It would be a waste of a frame. My smicha. Ich hab smicha. Chavarez genommen smicha. I don't know yet a day. When a Chassidish Bacher gets smicha from his own Rosh Yeshiva, it's not a big deal. You know, you want to. Rabbi Solab, he went to get smicha from the Moshe Feinstein. All of Hashem, the Moshe Feinstein gave smicha to all of his Talmidim. When Rabbi Solab came, he kept him 3 days. He tortured him. Your own Talmidim, it's not the same. So the taina was that all the Leivik smichas are Chassidish smichas. So there's no right that I can lend it afila. Chassidish Rav is a Chassidish smicha. So the Rebbe's father had to go get smichas from his Snagdish Rabbanim. It was a precondition to the Rabbanos. And of course, when that was solved, they found another excuse. It was a whole parsha. So one of the smiches that the Rebbe's father got was from Reb Chaim. Reb Chaim Brisker. Reb Chaim Soloveitchik of Brisker. It's really hard to describe what kind of a mahus Reb Chaim was. I once told him it's nagid, and I said it sincerely. I wasn't being sarcastic. I said Reb Chaim was such a Chassidish Yid. He said, what are you talking about? He was a Litvak. Reb Chaim was an incredible Chassidish Yid. Reb Chaim was a bittel diker Yid. Reb Chaim was so not in the tip of a Misnagdish Godel. He wore a smashed hat. He walked bent over on the side of the street. He took up no space. You know what they say about Reb Chaim? In Reb Chaim's private home, people used to hang advertisements. You know how you go on the street, you want to sell a piece of furniture, so you put the piece of furniture, and at the bottom you put phone numbers. People rip off a strip. Reb Chaim had Moidois in his living room.
So his wife was such a
Yeah. His wife said, we never sleep in our own bedroom. His house was a hektish. That was the kind of a man he was. He was a gon oilam. And he was such a Chassidish Yid. He was bemis a Chassidish Yid. A richtig Chassidish Yid. But Reb Chaim was a Godel. Was a Godel. Rebbe Rashab and him were so close. They were such good friends. They were really, really friends. Very close. And there was a lot of mutual respect. Reb Chaim was older than the Rebbe Rashab by a few years. So there's a letter which was now found. They printed in the last 5 years a new volume of the Rebbe Rashab's Igris Kedesh, Chelik Vov. It just came out in the last few years. They found letters in Russia. Maybe half the letters in that volume, or a third of the letters in that volume, are to Rebbe Leivik. Somebody found these letters, brought them here, and they published them. In one of the letters, the Rebbe Rashab is writing to the Rebbe's father about his smicha. And that he needs to go to Reb Chaim, to go to Brisk, to get smicha from Reb Chaim. He went to several Misnagdish Rabbanim. And amongst the Rabbanim was Reb Chaim. So the Rebbe Rashab writes to Reb Leivik, I need to ask Reb Chaim to help you, but I can't just write him out of the blue. It's not the kind of relationship they had. He says, I need another reason to write. And if I'm writing because of something else, I'll also be able to include the request for the smicha. So the Rebbe Rashab is sort of saying to the Leivik, I can't ask him. As much as I want to ask him to give you a smicha, that's the kind of respect he had for him. I can't just ask him, give smicha to mind that Talmud. He says, but go to Brisk, he'll give you the smicha. Mepnei shehu yirei shamayim be'emes. It says, it's printed in English Kaddish. The Rebbe Rashab writes about Reb Chaim. He'll go to Brisk, he'll give you the smicha. Mepnei shehu yirei shamayim, because he's really God-fearing. So there's, of course, this story. There's two stories which the Rebbe told by Farbrengen. There's the story with the sukkah, and then the other story is Reb Chaim farhed Reb Leivik for 3 days. He absolutely tortured him. 3 days. 3 days. What was the farhed? Reb Chaim was at off. He was Rosh Hashiva also, but he was at off. So he sat in the bed in Shtibel, and people came in with shilas. Anybody who came in with a shilas, Reb Leivik had to pask. And after Reb Leivik paskin, then he had to defend it. He had to give his nimuk. And Reb Chaim was a tough. Rabbi Metzger, Zal Gesund sein, described getting smicha from Reb Chaim's grandson, from Rabbi Yosef. He would bring the Bochum into a room, and he would mop the floor with them. In YU. He would scream at them. He would scream, briske Gishrei, like Amaratzim, Ferden. He would torture them. And then when the fair was over, he would suddenly smile and say, now you're an abundant. After they failed the test, he told them, anyway. So the Reb Chaim tortured the Rebbe's father. And the Rebbe's father, Yochel Kamayni, and you can't. So at one point, Reb Chaim was so impressed by the Rebbe's father. The Rebbe told this story by Farbrengen. There's actually a tape. I never heard the tape, but there's a tape of it. Leivik, as a good cup, cook for the legs. He says, Leivik, such a good head. Look what you're wasting it on. You're wasting it on Kabbalah. Leivik, as a good cup. This is what he said. Leivik, as a good cup, cook for the legs. This is the first story. This is the first story about the Rebbe's father's involvement in Kabbalah. The second story is that the Rebbe's father used to say Kabbalah, mamish like a fountain, a mayin amizgaber, and he wasn't repeating the same schere. He was alam al nai. It's nicht to verstehen. You look in the Rebbe's father's Torah and you see was meant arucha me'eres mida more than in Maimonides Chassidus. It's so vast and it's so much. Every line is something else, and it's just pages and pages and pages. It's incredible. So somebody once asked Reb Leivik, how do they know all this? How do they know all this? So Reb Leivik said, I was taught. Who taught him? Not Achia Shiloni, the Rebbe Rashab. So the Yid who asked him the question said to Reb Leivik, if we add up all the time you spent in Lubavitch, it doesn't justify how much you say. You say so much more. In other words, the Rebbe Rashab sat every minute you were in Lubavitch and talked to you in Yoni Kabbalah, you're speaking more than you heard. So the Rebbe's father said, Klolim. Man hat mir Rebbe gegeben Klolim. So he said, Klolim. I was given rules of how to interpret Kabbalah. And there's a story that I want to tell Bikesha to this, with the Rebbe Rashab himself. The Rebbe Rashab, in other words, the Rebbe Rashab was Reb Leivik's Rebbe in Kabbalah. So it says in the Teirah Shalom, the Rebbe Rashab Sichas, it says that the Rebbe Rashab said about himself, Ich haba yad in Kabbalah. That was the expression he used. Ich haba yad in Kabbalah. Yad, I have a hand in Kabbalah. And there's a story behind it. And the story behind it was that when the Rebbe Rashab was a little boy, he was in the Tzemach Tzedek's room, Tzemach Tzedek's Yechidus Sibir. He couldn't have been more than 5, because it was 5.5, and Tzemach Tzedek was nostalgic. Tzemach Tzedek picked up the Rebbe Rashab, put him on his lap. And he took his little hand, the Rebbe Rashab's hand, and he began to brush it through his beard, to separate the hairs. A beard can get entangled. He used the Tzemach Tzedek's fingers as a comb. And after a while, I don't know how long it took, the Tzemach Tzedek says, in Yiddish, of course, Tzebersht, Dachzach Tzebersht, Nadir Ayad in Kabbalah. Tzebersht, did you separate the hairs? You haven't Chassidus. To brush out the beard means to separate the hairs. You haven't Samach Vav. You have to separate the hairs. So he asked his grandson rhetorically. I mean, the kid was 4 years old. He was talking to his neshama more than to his goof. He says, "Nu, did you disentangle or did you unentangle all the hairs of my beard?" I think so. Nadir ayad, I'm giving you a yad in Kabbalah. And 50 years later, the Rebbe Rashab, 40 years later, the Rebbe Rashab used to say, it's in the Teir Shalom, Iyechav ayad in Kabbalah. Because his grandfather gave him. This is what the Rebbe's father believing. And he made him Rav. He made him Rav in a big city. It was a very honorable thing. If you read the Rebbe's grandfather's description, Ravash, Rabbi Roshneir says, me, the Rebbe didn't find a job for my boys, he found jobs. Believe me, the biggest favor he did for the Rebbe's grandfather was they didn't find him a job. Because that Rabbonis in a city like Yekaterinslav, to take a job in 1909 was, you would not have a day of peace. It was an impossible Rabbonis. It was an impossible Rabbonis. First of all, the politics. The community was torn not into 2 pieces, into 20 pieces. You had Frum and you had Freie. You had 5 or 6 different factions of Freie. You had anarchists and Zionists and Yiddishists and communists and socialists, whatever else. And then Frume. You had the modern Frume, you had the Haredi Frume, you had the Chassidim, you had the Misnagdim, Azasat Chosa. You know, and you had to walk between the raindrops. To become a Rav then was an almost impossible task. And by the way, when the Rebbe's father became a Rav initially, there was a second Rav, there was a Misnagdish Rav. He did not stay very long. When it became too hot in the kitchen, he left. So the Rebbe's father ended up with the Rabbanos. The Rebbe's father served as the Rebbe. He continued stuff for 30 years. It was an impossible task. It was really impossible. And the Rebbe's parents were loved by the Kehillah unbelievably. People who hated deeply what the Rebbe stood for, what the Rebbe's father stood for, on a personal level, absolutely loved him. It's one of those really, really strange phenomena. They hated what he said, they loved him. And if you think about it, most Rabbanim in Russia didn't last till 1939. Most Rabbanim in Russia were in jail by 1927. How did the Leibik last so long? I'm sure there's many answers, but the stories that they say is the guy would knock on the door, and Rebbe Tzimchana would open the door, and he would say to the Rebbe Tzimchana, "Heinzel the man that schlafen in der Heim," and he would leave. Tonight, your husband shouldn't sleep at home. So he went to sleep someplace else, 2 o'clock in the morning. The KGB came, he wasn't home. This didn't happen once, it happened 20 times, you understand? People looked out for him. People who worked for the KGB would give them notice that today he shouldn't sleep at home, and that kind of thing. And this is how the Rebbe Tzimchana describes it. And I think we know it from other sources. The Rebbe's father was a great mind, but he also had unbelievably good people skills. He literally able leilech neged ruach shel kol echad vechad. Everybody in the city related to him, and he related to them. He was everybody's Rav. So you take a Yid, a Gon and a Kodesh, Bemis, a Emes a Gon and an Emes a Kodesh, and you throw him into such a Rishus HaRabim. This is what was necessary. This was the time. And he served this Kehillah, he served the Kehillah for 30 years. And the Rebbe grew up in this house. The Rebbe grew up in this house. The Rebbe would often or occasionally make reference to his early years. There's a famous story in Lubavitch, which I'm not going to tell you, but the Nekudas Asipa was that somebody blackmailed the Rebbe. Someone blackmailed the Rebbe. Someone blackmailed the Rebbe, threatened the Rebbe.
The Rebbe.
Our Rebbe. There's a tape, Tafshan Lamed, hey, you listen to the tape. So the Rebbe says, "Ich bin ausgewachsen in sowjetischen Russland," the Rebbe said. I was born in Soviet Russia. Und ich bin gewesen der älteste Sohn von dem Rav. I was the oldest son of the Rav. So very often, they would call us in for questioning, and I had to go and answer questions. And the Rebbe said, and if I wasn't afraid of them, I'm going to be afraid of him. That's what the Rebbe said publicly. Ich habe versehentlich Meide gehabt. Well, if I wasn't afraid of the KGB and the Sexy and the 20s, I'm not going to be afraid of him. The Rebbe grew up in a world of askanas. He grew up in a world of askanas. The Rebbe's entire life was surrounded by public service. And there's like a sort of a built-in contradiction here. On the one hand, the Rebbe was surrounded by askanas. On the other hand, the Rebbe and his brothers were totally oblivious to it. The Rebbe's parents came to Yekaterinslav and they rented a very large apartment. The communists took a half an apartment away. But when they first came, they rented a gigantic apartment. And there was enough space for each child to have his own room. The Rebbe and Chana wanted each one of them. There were 3 boys, each had their own room. And they sat in that room 18 hours a day and learned Torah. The Rebbe and Chana used to tell people, I have to fight with them to eat. The Rebbe's mother said, I have to fight with them to eat. The hasmada that these 3 boys had. Derech Agav, there's a Yid who wrote an essay about the Rebbe's brother. His name was Yeshaya Shor. He was a macher in Israel. It went around him, and if I have it, it's not a secret. I have no connections or secret files. He wrote an essay on the Rebbe's brother, Leib, because of Leib Shneis, Leib Gerari, Leib. He describes the Rebbe's brother. They knew each other in Russia, and then they knew each other in Eretz Yisrael. It's a painful document. It's rather interesting, comprehensive. He was a member of the choir. The Rebbe's father was the Rav of the whole city. The city had, I don't know how many Bate Knesses, 20 shuls, 100 shtiblach. He was the Rav of all of that, but he davened in the largest shul. The largest shul was in Ashkenaz. It was a modern shul, a from shul, but it was a modern shul. And that's where the Rebbe's father davened. People say that the Rebbe used to do certain things like Minig Ashkenaz, because in the shul that he grew up in, if you've ever watched how, when they do Yahalelu, by us it's very short, right? Yahalelu, yeah. Hey, but by them they say Uva Menucha Yeimar. If you would watch, the Rebbe would say the longer Nusach. The Rebbe was the whole time was more, because the shul where the Rebbe grew up, it was an Ashkenaz minyan, and they had a chazan and a choir. And Label was one of the kids in the choir. His name was this Yeshaya Shor. He was a kid that had a great voice. He was apparently a soloist, and Rebbe's brother wanted to make his acquaintance. That's how they met. And he met him, and they talked. They became good friends. They would spend a lot of time together. And he writes different things, which I'm not going to tell you now. You can find the document. If I found it, you can find it. Believe me, I don't have special connections. He says the oldest son they called the Rav Tzoyer. There were 3 boys. The difference of age between the Rebbe and his next brother was a minimum of 3 years, possibly more. But the Rebbe was called a young rabbi. Label and Pharaoh were not young. The Rebbe, there were 3 of them, and the Rebbe was different. He describes this. There were 3 boys, and he was friends with the middle one and the younger one. The older one was different. Even then, everybody knew the oldest son, the Rebbe was different. And people have said that the Rebbe's entire chinuch, the Rebbe did not see the big world, when he came to America. He didn't grow up in a shtetl. The Frierdiker Rebbe grew up in Lubavitch. The Rebbe grew up in Yekaterinslav, in a large metropolis, with tens of thousands of Jews, with winds, stormy winds in every imaginable direction, all blowing at the same time. And the Rebbe weathered these storms. The Rebbe was involved. Like I said before, Mitzadecha, the Rebbe and his brother were totally disinvolved. On the other hand, we know of 2 occasions, which the Rebbe would talk about from time to time, where the Rebbe literally closed the Gemara and he became a public servant. One of them is the one I told you before about the typhus epidemic. And the second one was, and the Rebbe talked about the Farbrengen once, was when the immigrants arrived at the end of World War I. Near the end of World War I, tens of thousands of Jews arrived in Yekaterinslav, in the Rebbe. So the Rebbe said, hat man jemals gemacht Komitetten. They made different committees. One committee had to, how do you house tens of thousands of people who are coming with valises, mamish. So one had to find them housing, another committee had to find them clothing, another committee had to find them food, another committee had to find them work, another committee had to provide schooling for all of these children. And the Rebbe says, my mother was the chairman of the committee that oversaw all the committees. And he says, in my entire life, I never saw my mother operate like this. He'd never seen his mother before or after. He doesn't look. He never said about Farbrengen. There's a tape of it. Anyway, but the Rebbe and his brothers got involved. There are secular sources that tell stories of the immigrants who arrived in Yekaterinslav and how the Schneerson boys helped them, physically helped them to find an apartment. And what they describe is that these immigrants arrived, and it wasn't only they gave them housing and they gave them clothing and they gave them food and they provided them with jobs where it was possible and they gave them schooling. They did it because they didn't feel like schnorrers. They made the immigrants feel welcome. And they credited the Rebbe's parents and the Rebbe and his brothers. They were they were the vanguard of this effort. So this was another occasion when the Rebbe literally closed his Gemara and became an asket. So the Rebbe's early years were were saturated with Haskanas. The Rebbe's father was the Rav. The Rebbe's father was the Rav. He led the Eidah, the Kila, in a very incredible way. And of course, there's so many stories. The stories about a couple coming in the middle of the night to do a bris, or a couple in the middle of the night coming to make a chuppah. An agent of the KGB shows up with his wife and says, "Don't tell anybody, but I want to get married." Kedas v'kedin. Things like this. And this was what the Rebbe's parents did for all those years in Yekaterinuslam. And of course, the end of the story is the story with matzah. End of the story is the story with matzah. Okay, I'm talking too long as it is, yeah? L'chaim. I'm sorry. It's in Russian. Now it's called the Neper Petrov. You know about my website? You know about my website? You want a card? You want a card? My website. Schatten kenn es nicht. He said clothing. He was given general rules. That's what he said, clothing. But when you didn't get clothing, I said it. I was given rules about how to study God. With Mendel Chaim? Right. Benzin Friedman. There's a few things. Benzin Friedman. I didn't know. Okay. Jim, I don't remember. What's the fate of that?
האמת היא שלא היה. לפעמים הייתי רק מה עם רבי היה באמת. לא, ברור לקיינים הרב היה עושה מהיד. זה היה איך יודעים? עד שבת, עד שרבי...
Ayid kommt vom Taten mit der Scheiße. Verbeheben. Und der Taten ist auch gedreht. Und der Umgewandt Zentrum, jeder ist... The next day, this same guy is in there. Verzeihlung. Der Rav ist Agane. Und weiß, kann ich lernen. So, nicht verstanden. He lost 10 ruble. He didn't say a word. Lost 2 ruble. What's the tenant? He's not upset that he lost it. The other guy got it. The other guy
have a guy, I think my friend is
there. Yeah. Your mother told me the story. Now wait, listen, we have business, right? There's a girl who lived in your city. Remember years ago? Sarah, she moved. Does she have a second child? You know, she has a baby? Where does she live now?
Rabbi say you can come closer.
Okay, so you don't know what she did. She got angry at me, she stopped talking.
Nancy, אתה אומר לחיים?
Ich habe ihr geätzet that if she doesn't have a husband, she should have another baby. Terrible.
Kinderlach, say לחיים, we have
I'm
לחיים.
going to stay there.
אתה יודע כמה סיפורים יש, שאתה עוזר למישהו. בלי לחשוב בכלל.
I'm sorry.
אתה מקבל את זה חזרה.
It was decided yesterday, so you couldn't decide. Nu Yoni was Herzach.
Yoni Akoye.
Toy da 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 yo 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 ya 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 Was was essen? Uncle Sam. Hadoit Shmuel. Right. In 52.
52, yeah.
You were in Manchester. He was in Liverpool, which is nearby.
He was in the university. Teaching maths. And all the Lubavitch we went to the Rabbi, then they sent ships to terrorists from Rosh Hashiva wouldn't let me go. Anyway.
The Lubavitches you let go, but you didn't count you as a... But you knew them. You knew that as his brother, sister-in-law, and niece.
Yeah, I didn't know the Rebbe's brother, never saw him. They moved to London.
Right.
This is the
Label. His name was Label.
They moved to London, and they used to come to Shem Tov and stay.
To the Sudak.
So I knew the daughter Dahlia, and I remember when she said to me, she showed me a camera. She said, "Look, my uncle sent me this as a present, as a camera, as a gift." And I didn't have it. The Rebbe sent me a camera for a birthday present.
That's so sweet.
Yeah.
She used to come with her boys. She had 2 sons. She made a bris.
She had sons as well.
Not Dalia, the daughter.
Oh, the daughter.
The daughter's name was Dalia, no?
Yeah, when she got married.
She had 2 children. I don't know. She's an old lady. She's in her 70s.
Yeah, easily. 80s.
2 labels, yeah. So she had 2 sons. One of her sons was born when they were a member of the delegation to Washington. And the Rebbe sent them an entire bris. One of the boys was born here in Washington. The Rebbe sent them an entire bris, including a minion. Who was in the minion? Chadakov. Kazanowski. Spitz Chabad. Like Bais Hadav. The Rebbe looked at his niece. They went to Rebbe Chadakov to participate in the bris. I don't even know how from they were.
Yeah.
The Rebbe sent Chadakov to Washington. He started from the bris.
She divorced later.
That's what I heard, yeah. Okay, the Rebbe
He's a Mizrahi guy.
Anyway, if we understood the ways of God, we'd be mad. You know what I'm saying?
Where are these today?
I have no idea what. I don't keep track of them. The Sudaks knew them, and the Rebbe wanted very much to honor their privacy. So the Sudaks were involved with them. I heard that whenever the Neshech Chabad made a big event, they would invite her. Let's say Label's mother, Label's Rebbe, Dalia's mother, Label's Mrs. Gerari, and she would come. And she would sit. Many people didn't know. She would come to all the big events in London. She would come and participate. But she wanted to be left, Label's wife. And Genya, okay. And she wanted to be left alone. Right. And she lived in London, and the Sudaks knew them well, and they would pick her up, and she would come, and she would participate. And for the Rebbe, this was very, very, very important. Very, very important.
How old are the boys?
Well, they were born in the 70s. They were in their 40s. The 40s.
The only relative.
The only blood relative the Rebbe has. And the Rebbe, they're adopted. For the Friedrich Rebbe, it's a dead
There's
end.
someone in Israel also.
Huh?
In Israel. That was maybe from his mother.
Say kid, say boy.
From the Rebbe had cousins, right? The Rebbe had his father's brothers had children, and they were connected to Mishpachas Chaim. One of them married the Mendel Chaim's Atochte. They were Balichush, and the Rebbe had related a Meshoyer Zelda, the first cousin of the Rebbe. They corresponded. Anyway, I love it in Matzah.
בנצי, לא שומעים אותך.
Nicht so viel der
בנצי, לא שומעים אותך. לא, תגיד משהו בתקול. רבי פלטיאל התוועד אתמול בלילה, ככה שמעתי. הוא גם התוועד היום, ועכשיו אנחנו מתוועדים.
Hello, אבל על גל האינטרנט מתוועד 20 שעות ביממה.
Oh yeah?
Okay.
Okay, guys.
Inside Hasidus.
Go online and come every night to the Chavrusa program here. InsideChasidus.org.
Very good, thank you. If you want, I'll give you my card. I have a few cards.
Oh yes, very good.
I'm sorry?
And there's an app.
There's an app now, yeah. There's a lot of things. Baruch Hashem. People are helping me. Please check it out. Yankee, yeah. We even correspond. He's at Talmud. Yeah. Emes. So, talk about the matzah. The Rebbe's father was Meis Nefesh Matzah. And in Derech HaTevit, that's what cost him his life. They arrested him right before Pesach. He was arrested Tes Nissen, Tafresh Talik Tes, 1939, because he fought a war with the Russian government over matzah. So I remember the Rebbe saying once, and I later looked for it, and I couldn't find it. You know, when you hear the Rebbe say something, so you go back to the Hanochas and you say, okay, where is it? I found something similar. I think it was a weekday Farbrengen, so I could probably find the tape. But I spent a long time looking for this. And I didn't find exactly what I recall. So maybe I recall wrong. I wouldn't be the first time for a person to imagine that the Rebbe said something. But the Rebbe said, the way I remember it, of all Tayag mitzvahs, that's the Tata Yekocht and Matzah. My father, the Rebbe's father, about his father, he dedicated his life to the Eden in the Ukraine of kosher and matzah. He was Meis Nefesh for this. So the Rebbe said, why matzah? There's Tayag mitzvahs, there's so many other mitzvahs he could have kocht. Why did he koch chen matzah? So the Rebbe answered that under the conditions that Yidden in Russia were living then, it wasn't realistic for all Yidden to be Makayim all Tayag mitzvahs. So the Rebbe, the Tate, my father, the Rebbe said, hat sich genommen zu Matzah, because Matzah is Michel dem Himenusa. Matzah has to do with Amunah. That even if a Yid is Chas Hashem not in a position where he's able to keep all the Tag mitzvahs, at least the Amunah should be wholesome. And every year he fought a war with the government. You read in the letters that when the Rebbe Rayatz first left Russia, he used to import matzah. He would send matzah into Russia. I don't know why that stopped. I'm assuming the government didn't allow it. And it's also possible that the Frierdiker was saying the matzah to Russia as opposed to the Ukraine. There are two different parts of Russia. The Ukraine has a lot of wheat. It was called at one point, until the great sage, the great genius, the great social scientist, Joseph Stalin, destroyed it all. The Ukraine was the breadbasket of the world. They were exporting grain, all of a sudden they were importing grain. The joke about the Russians. They were trying to make friends, so they would export grain and then they had no food, so they had to buy it back for 10 times the cost, but no one was allowed to know. It was a state secret. So there was wheat in the Ukraine. But all the wheat was bleached. It was chametz. And the Rebbe's father wanted wheat that was unbleached. So he came to the government and he asked them for wheat. And the government said, go buy it in the store. He said, no, it has to be Pesach or Shlo Pesach. So they told him, don't be so religious. He said, listen, if I'm going to put a hechshan, it has to be my standard. Did you put the stamp? No one has to know. Nobody has to know. And Rabbi said, but I'm going to know. So he fought a war with the government, year after year after year. And the way, the Rebbe told the story in a lot of detail, but there was a goy, Kalinin. Kalinin was the president of Russia, the president of the Soviet Union. He was an eccentric, he was a funny man, but he wasn't bad. He wasn't bad, he was just strange. And he helped a lot of Yidden. All the Jews who got out of Russia in the 1930s got out with Kalinin's help. All of them, and there's so many of them. Because what they did was they used to, in Israel, they would create fake cities and fake communities and fake shuls. They make duds. There was no such city, there was no such kehillah, there was no such shul. And they would send to a Rav in Russia an invitation that they need him to become Rav in their shtetl. And they did this many, many times. They did it in America also. Rabbi Castalzo Gazunzain tells me that the Rebbe's father had an invitation to move to Boston. He was supposed to become the chief rabbi of Boston. And I mentioned this before, that when the Rebbe's father was arrested, he was cross-examined. One of the questions that they asked him was, you were given an invitation to move to Boston. I thought it was said Israel, but he told me Boston. How come you didn't leave Russia then? And the Rebbe's father said, because we have a son who's not well. His name was Beryl. And they would not allow him to come into America, or whatever country it was, so we had to decline the offer because they didn't want to leave him behind. It's printed. It's not in the new Talmud of Yizchok, it's printed, but it was from the Rebbe's father's cross-examination, which came out in the summer of Tafshin and Aleph. Anyway, so a lot of people got out of Russia with Kalinin's papers. What you would do is you would get an invitation from Eretz Yisrael or from America, and you would go and arrange all the preliminary stuff, and then of course they would give you 101 reasons why you couldn't leave. So you would camp out outside Kalinin's house. You would just wait. Sometimes you waited a week. So you had the biggest Rabbonim in Russia sitting outside this guy's palace day after day and night, just waiting for him. And then every once in a while you just roll out. If you happened to be there when he came out of his house, whatever paper you handed him, he signed. You signed it. And that was it. And you overrode the everything. That was it. He was the president. He had the power of a pardon. So sometimes he can come out 3 times in a night. Sometimes he waited 4 days for him. There are stories. We know people. Rabbi Farbrengen got out of Russia that way. Rabbi Zevin got out of Russia that way. And the list goes on and on. The biggest Rabbonim who left Russia in the 1930s got with the help of Kalinin. Rabbi Leivik went to Kalinin. And he said, Jews, there's no, in Russia there's equal rights. And people are allowed to practice their religion. We need to have kasher matzah. So Kalinin wrote a letter. And the Rebbe repeated the toich of the letter. That the matzah has to be made according to the guidelines of Harav Shneir's son and his mashgichim. And everything has to be done to satisfy their priorities. And if a person doesn't follow the priorities, he's breaking the law. So what finally happened was, 1 year after this whole regular hurdle, so they finally got him wheat which was unbleached, and they filled a wagon, a train car, and it had a hole on the roof, and it rained, and it leaked, and the whole thing became chometz. So Rabbi Leivik needed new wheat. And this was too much. He needed more. He needed a second time. And he came and he said the wheat became chometz, and the Russian government said, "You're going to say it's not chometz, you know?" He says, "No, I'm not going to say, kosher, you know. What a goy thinks of kosher, did the rabbi bless the food? Or you didn't pay the rabbi didn't bless the food ain't kosher, that their hasagis." And Rabbi Leivik went to war, and he went back to Kalinin, and Kalinin wrote another letter, whatever it was, and they gave him wheat. And this was too much. They said to Rabbi Leivik, "You pushed, we're going to get you for this." And he was arrested for Pesach. Again, nobody says, but Fedish. Testnis. So nobody says it outright, but I think it's quite obvious that his most recent crime was the crime of matzah. But Rabbi Leivik Bechlal he was at the Friedrich Rebbe. Rabbi Leivik got up in one of the largest cities in Russia, in a gigantic shul, and spoke openly about chinuch. Just the Friedrich Rebbe. He didn't apologize. He didn't hide. He was such a schneers. He was so bold. He would get up in shul and speak about teaching your children about Torah, and he would say the same thing we heard the Rebbe say. It's not against the law. You're allowed to teach children. There's restrictions. You can only teach 4 children. You can't have more than 4 children in a cheder. But if anybody tells you that it's illegal to teach Yiddish Kindlach Torah, you sort of see Tafshin Mem like Baimet. He's a criminal. Criminal. They're not spoken Russian. I don't understand Russian, but those words we understood. He's a criminal. He's going against the laws of the state. And the Leivik used to get up in shul and speak this way, fire and brimstone. The KGB was sitting there listening to him. He was not subtle. He was in their face. It's such a nest. He was a Leivik. He was the Rebbe's father. How he lasted till 1939 is a pele. But he never hid. He was very careful. He was very careful. Huh?
But the Friedrich didn't pour him.
Well, the Friedrich didn't put him. The Friedrich did it Bechlal. Put him was a special occasion. But the Friedrich Rebbe spoke about, the Rebbe got up in shul and he said it's not against law to be a Yid. And the Leivik did the same thing, over and over and over again, right in their faces, no shame. And they arrested him. And then, of course, we know the rest of the story, that he suffered terribly in the Leivik. He suffered terribly. For 5 or 6 months, he went from prison to prison. There's a printed Rishima, which the Rebbe spoke Farbrengen once about, that begins with the words, Ani Levi Yizchok ben Zelda. That's how it starts. It's printed in the Hagdom in the beginning of the Rishima. It's called Lekut Levi Yizchok and Tanya. It's a small little pamphlet. So in the front they have this. Apparently the Leivik wrote in his Tanya this Rishima, Ani Levi Yizchok ben Zelda. I'm sorry. He describes events in his life and explains them on Pikabala. He sat in 6 different prisons, but one prison he was twice in the same prison. Kum to Chayset, he was in 5 prisons. This corresponds to the Hey Gvuras. And Levi is the name of Gvura, and Yitzchak is the name of Gvura. He's masbir every detail of his incarceration up in Kabbalah. So the Rebbe spoke about this in a Sikha, which is printed also, of course. And the Rebbe said, when you read my father's Rishima about his incarceration, you see 2 things. At the same time, on the one hand, you see such unbelievable bittul. A Yid is Makabel Yisuna Ba'avam, and how much did he suffer? This is one of those remarkable things. Somebody brought the Rebbe a photo of his father. Someone brought the Rebbe a photo of his own father. And the Rebbe asked him who it is, or her who it is. Yeah. I heard recently who it is. That Reb Zalman Burtman was one of the shluchim, Toshin Tezayin, right? And he went to see Shalom Ber Burtman, one of the shluchim, and he went to see one of the chains. It was a chain married to Ashneerson. And he gave her a picture of the Rebbe, and she gave him the photograph of the Rebbe before his Absheret. That's where that picture comes from. But I think she also had this picture of the Rebbe, of Rabbi Leivik. And they brought this picture. I saw it with my own eyes. You see it in the library. The Rebbe wrote on the back of the photograph, "My father?" ? He didn't recognize his own father. In 5 years, they broke him. So he pushed it. The Rebbe did not. Now in Nun Aleph, when they gave out the file, we saw how Rabbi Leivik used to look. So you could understand why they pushed it. It's not the same person. They destroyed him. For 5 or 6 months he was in prisons. And if I give him klep, the Russians used to beat them. Makas Retzach. And then of course, they judged him for 5 years of exile. But the 5 years were retroactive. In other words, it started from the time they arrested him.
How many years was it since the Rebbe saw his father?
When he was arrested,
No. Yeah. He didn't see him.
the Rebbe left Russia in the end of 27.
Yeah.
Peches. His father passed away in 1944.
Okay. So he never saw him for all that.
Never saw him again. Never saw him again. Never saw him again.
Well, it was about 15 years.
Anerech. Yeah, it was a long time. The Rebbe left Peches.
So he didn't recognize.
He didn't recognize his father, but the photo that they arrested him in 1939,
Oh,
it's a different man. They found that picture. The KGB gave the Rebbe his father's file.
his file, yeah.
So the difference in the old picture and the new picture is only 5 years. It's not
Yeah,
50.
he got much older then. No, he got his face.
And
got
you
got-
see,
Just read the old picture and then he wishes it.
the old picture is the Rebbe's father looking like a malach. He looks like an
When he
angel.
first was arrested.
No. When he came out of his incarceration, he looks ancient. Sure, that's when we grew up. The picture, I mean, you're older than I am, but the old told us Levi Yizchok had a picture of the Rebbe's father.
Drawn face like
Yeah, an incredibly drawn face. He looks exhausted. Looks old. In 1991, Tov Shin Nun Aleph, they found the picture from the beginning of his arrest. So that's the new picture. The new picture is older than the old picture, just the way it worked out. And you see the contrast between the two photos. The whole difference is 5 years.
How old is he?
He was 66 when he passed away. And he was a gibber. Shetel kute de burim. At the Bais Harazan, gewend stark. The Rebbe Nayatz is describing Reb Nochem, the middle Rebbe, son of Nochem. He says that all the members of the Rebbe, achutz the Rebbe, weil gelitten von the Tzares, was Menschen haben gebracht. Rebbe Leivik was a gibber. He was a gibber. He was a strong man. I mean, people love to imitate him. The shmua is that when he would do Hagbeh, and the Sefer Torah in Russia were not like Sefer Torah today. Today Sefer Torah are made with shlill. They're paper. A Sefer Torah was heavy. He would open up 9 yediyos. You see the kids doing it. They're imitating Rebbe Leivik. Rebbe Leivik was a gibber. He was physical.
Nicht 9 years, 9 Turin.
Nine, right, of course. 9 years is impossible. 9, right. And you're not supposed to do it. Up Yalocha, you're not supposed to do it. I said to all the Nishtamim, we can say,
It's not Kabbalah, it's not Kabbalah.
Up Yalocha, Tormen is Nishtam. But then he was a strong man. He passed away at 66. They stole from him who knows how many years. They broke him. It's a brach. He was verschickt. In Mamish, in Ekwelt. He was so far away from a yishuv. Almatah. My son was almost in Almatah. He says in Almatah you see Chinese people. It's near China.
Yeah.
Chile was further east than Almatah. It was so far away. And there wasn't a person around. There was nobody even to have a fight with. It was so lonely. Mosquitoes. There was no shortage of mosquitoes. There was nothing. And the Rebbe's father was so lonely. The Rebbe's mother describes, that the Rebbe's mother wrote a Rishima, which was called Loi Shrei Beroni. The Rebbe's mother wrote a Rishima describing her husband's arrest and her husband's last years. It begins with the words Loi Shrei Beroni. Harav Zevin wrote when he saw the Loi Shrei Beroni, as is a kasver Raveh. Harav Zevin was a real maven. He was an artist. He was a talented man. Rabbi Zevin saw Rebbe Simchana's writings. It begins with the words "Loi Shreiberoni v'Loi Bas Shreiberon." So it begins. We were kids growing up. Loi Shreiber, one of the contrabras, one of the hidden rishimas of Smenkat. Today it's called Ein B'Yisrael. Ein B'Yisrael was originally written in French and then translated from French into Hebrew. It's based on the Loi Shreiber. It was written in Yiddish. She sent that to a friend in Eretz Yisrael. There's a whole hishtalshus how the Rebbe found out about it. Loi Shreiberani was a secret. You're not allowed to have it. It was like a sin. We all were sinners. We had a lot of Avedas. This was one of them. And then the Rebbe allowed him to publish it. In the mid-mems, they gave it out there. So she describes Rabbi Leivik. Peites, yeah. Tivan Asach Avedas.
His daughter.
No, the Yuman.
Yes,
The lange Brief, the Juman für Petes, die Juman für Petes, ich gewinne eine Wehre. Der Juman für Petes. Der Rebbe hat gesagt, mein Kingdom ist schwer unter den Nägeln.
Ich kenne viele jetzt,
Ah?
bis jetzt hat man es nie befasst.
Was?
Man darf nicht. Der Human von Friedrich Rebbe.
Weil man hat es nicht. Du weißt, der Rebbe, so da ein Kracht Iglis Kedisch, was man gedruckt mit 10 Jahre früher, die ganze Kracht ist von der Friedrich Rebbe zu dem Rebbe. Du weißt von dem? Dort steht, der Friedrich Rebbe schreibt zum Rebbe, wo sind alle meine Chof? Ich habe sehr viel geschrieben, wo sind sie hingegangen? The Friedrich Rebbe is writing to the Rebbe during his physical lifetime. I wrote so much, where are my writings? They disappeared. They're finding him in Russia now. Man gefindt sie in Russland. Wir sehen sie vergangen. They don't, you know, when Adolf Hitler went with the Medel of Hashem, and so long he had Abraham Shem Tov to Poland to send them the Sifriya, yeah, the Klavim, had the Rebbe they gefragt, sie dort nicht voran die Gnise.
Die was?
The Gnise Hachesonis. And from what I understood, they didn't find it. The Friedrich Rebbe had the Gnise. And the Rebbe said that in the Gnise, they were in Yom of Shemus of Kabbalah. You know, people complained that the Gnise is forged. So the Rebbe said, how could you say that the Gnise is forged? You didn't see it all. I did. And they were Poshet and Yom of Kabbalah Shemus. An imposter could not have written these things because he doesn't know Kabbalah. The Rebbe was mafarsim a lot of letters from the Gnise, but he wasn't mafarsim all the
Das
letters.
die Tarichim hat man geteilt, das ist
Das ist verschieden, der Papier gewinnt zu jung, aber das ist auch Narrischkeiten. Aber der Rebbe, der Rebbe, ist man weiß, was ich kann sagen. Der Rebbe, ich habe gesehen alle Briefe, da von Jahren von Sedes, von Sheves Malachim, Sachen, was nur der Bashama, die kennt wissen. Man kann das nicht fälschen, you can't forge, you know, unless Kabbalah is one big joke. Like the Bais of Shmuel Munkes mit dem Kreppel. Nur so Shmuel Munkes mit dem Kreppel. You know the story? That's an unusual Kabbalah. Aber ich meine, anyway.
Regabe Yunus ist das Kabbalah.
Der war wohl gefragt, die Kasche, wollte nicht, die meint, das ist attakativ in der Kabbalah. Anyway, so the Rebbe's father was Meis Nefesh from Matzeh. So the Rebbe and Chana describes those years. She went to be with him. She went to be with her husband. And it was very difficult. There was no money. There was no food. And they were so lonely. And there were people who helped them. There was a Yid, his name was Rabinovich. Nee, ich bin in Russland. Ein anderer Rabinovich.
Ich bin auch sicher in Jerusalem.
Er ist ein mehr Rabinovich gewesen. Ich weiß auch viele nicht, der Rabinovich, ein Reis von Russland. Er ist nicht gewinnt, aber ich bin ein Frumerin, ich war nicht von Messias Nefesh. Und er hat sich geholfen, Pashat Begash, mir ist geholfen. Mir dachte, er hat sich geholfen, dass viele sein, die arrestiert. In other words, when he was verschickt. I have a neighbor, Shlomo Galper, told me a mice about this Rabinovich. Was er Idee gewesen? I think his name was Rabbi Rabinowitz. He was a frume Yid till Mesiras Nefesh. And at one point, he was living in a certain city where they were not warming the mikveh. There were not that many women using the mikveh. There were not many women using the mikveh. Nee, das ist Amerikaner, das ist Rabbi, ich weiß, was das ist. Das ist mehr Rabbi. Ja, das ist ein anderer. Ich bin in Boston, ja. Ich dachte mir, ich bin nach Griechen, ich bin ehrlich geredet. Sie hätten das Zelt schlimm mit dem Zelt. Als ich bin nach Stadt, ich bin am Mikve, und mit Machel ich bin am Heißen nicht der Mikve. Für was? Bis an der kostet das Sachgeld. Für das Schönig, wenn sehr wenig freuen. Hat der Jeder mehr aber gerufen als Sife. Sie kommen zu gehen, alle Machers, und ich bin auf Heißen der Mikve. Haben sie gesagt, ein Stück Geld. Hat er gegeben dem Maren Kedisch. Dreht uns Sefetere. Und sagt, Ot is Holz. Ot is Holz. And they knew he was going to burn the Sefeteres. He was going to burn the Sefeteres to warm the mikveh. So they warmed the mikveh. But could you imagine? He opened the Maren Kedisch. He took out the Sefetere. And he said, Ot is Holz. You have no wood? Here's wood. And they knew that he's going to take those Sefer Teiros and he's going to burn them. This was going to make it. Huh? The Sefer Teiros.
So why he could have said it? Get money.
But to think about the Yid, but what's meant Mesiras Nefesh? You know, he had a whole. This man helped the Rebbe's parents personally a lot, and she describes. Das ich noch ein Reis kommen. Das ich gewesen in Almata, Reis gehen. Als Reis noch Pesach und das nicht geworden auf Menachem. Für die finden wir das, was sie haben geholfen. Aber mir dachte sich, der Rabbi Noah hat sich geholfen, die sein dich in Chile. Sein dich verschickt, hat sie gefunden. I think, I don't know. Hat sie geholfen, das noch. She describes different events. She did Rebbe's in Chane. She describes Simchas Torah. He took a Mishnayos and a Tanya and a Chumash and he danced around the chair. And he danced for Simcha Rabbe. It was so hard. He was so lonely. And one of the events that she writes about in her Rishimis, which I saw, this is already later. This is the new Rishimis. This is not in the Leish Rebbe, this is in the new Rishimis. You know, the Rebbe Chana wrote the Rishim Leish Rebbe. It's a long essay. And she sent it to a friend. But she also kept a private journal. She didn't write in her journal every day. She wrote in the journal sometimes once in a month or 2 months. But over the course of 20 years, it's an accumulation. And they printed it. America's printed the whole. Like I said before, if you want to read the Rebbe Chana's journal, it's called the Rishimis Rabbanas Chana. It's a whole bunch of, it's like I think 40 quotations. If you go to Lahak, lahak.com. Lahak has, you can download PDFs, the entire her Rishimis from the America years that she wrote here. And one of the Rishimis is Bais Nissen. And she says, wie der Mann hat gepravet Bais Nissen. Wie der Mann, the Rebbe Rashab was her father's husband's Rebbe. And she describes the last Bais Nissen Tafshin Dalet. Before he passed away, he was still, and how they had Yepravet Bais Nissen, the Rebbe's father. Anyway, the end of the story is, I'm telling stories, yeah? It's up mice, everyone's awake. That he came out of jail right before Pesach. And there was a law then, that prevented him from going away. Because even though he was free, but because the war was still going on, you're talking April or this is March or April of 44. I'm imagining, I don't know precisely, but I'm imagining that the Russians had already pushed the Germans out of Germany. They probably were fighting in Poland at that point. And they were certainly in Western Russia, they were not in Eastern Russia. But there was a rule that as long as the war was going on, you couldn't move from your location. Even if you were a prisoner whose sentence had ended, you had to stay where you were. So the Chassidim they worked hard, they pulled it off. They played around, and they got him permission to leave. They played around, they did some bribing and some forging and some other good stuff. And the Rebbe's parents were allowed to come to Almata, which was the nearest yeshiva of Yidden. There was a Kehillah, there's a Beis HaChaim. And there were a lot of Lubavitch Chassidim there who had run away from all the Tzaras, including the Raskins were there. The Rebbe said that Geshem Gerala Kapanim was also there in Almata. And when the Rebbe came before Pesach, they took care of him. They got him an apartment. They probably had to get him clothing. He had nothing. And the story was a doctor came to examine him. And Ableivik was dying. And Ableivik had Yena Machle. You're talking 75 years ago. There was no cure. And the doctor put him on a liquid diet. It'll prolong his life a little bit, maybe have a little less pain. And he sees that Ableivik had already prepared matzeh and morer and katpas and charitzis and all that good stuff, and dalet cases. So the doctor says to the Ableivik, you're not eating this food. So the Ableivik said, this is not food. This is mitzvahs. This is not food. And there's some stories about the few months that Rebbe's father made an impression. There's a few people who were interviewed by Rebbe's father. The Yid, I don't know names, but sometimes you'll learn more about the person being interviewed than about the Rebbe's father. The Edelkeit. So one of the people, an Israeli younger man, he's probably older than my father, who was interviewed, says that when the Rebbe would walk in the street, people would turn their heads to look at him. Und die ältere Goyim Farok nehmen dem Hittel und einbegen dem Kopf. His countenance, they had this ponem, yeah. When the Levi could walk in the street, so everybody would turn to look. The Eltere that you still remember the days of Das would take off their hats and lower their heads, just from looking at him. Just from looking at him, Rebbe Leivik. And he was there, so of course, I think there's I'm talking Tafshin Dalet now, after.
There's a guy who says he's 11 years old on the Gem video.
Yeah, he tells stories with such an edelkeit. You could see that he himself is a very edel man. The sensitivity with which he describes it. I don't know who he is. He doesn't sound like a Lubavitcher, but he speaks so edel. You know, it's special. The interview was special. Listen to it. Dichter fru.
That's so.
Ja. Mit der volle Bord.
Yeah, with the Shabbos.
So the David Raskin, I think, tells the story that Shavuos, Rebbe Leivik was in shul, and he spoke to the children. And what? Why not the David Raskin? David Raskin was a bar mitzvah yingel. He wasn't the baby. I think I heard the name of David Raskin. Maybe I'm wrong. Okay, but the point was that the Rebbe Leivik made a drasha. And he spoke to the children. He made a drasha to the kids. And he spoke to them what the Rebbe used to say all the time, about B'neinu Erevim Ba'adeinu. The Rebbe Leivik spoke to the little children, and he talked to them how they're the future, and that the Jewish people are going to survive if they're going to be Yidden, and the achrayet that they have to take in everything that they're given, so they should be able to continue it. This was the taking of the drasha. Rebbe Leivik. This was Shavuos. Ich bin auch wissen, wie viel das ist in meiner Zeit, but one of the stories that I heard, Chof, Shin, Dalet, a powerful Lashon for the Petire. David Raskin was a bar mitzvah yingel, why not? 17. Wer hat er geboren? P.A.? Wie viel hat er? P.Zayin. So Label was younger. Okay. Anyway, so there's another story, which from, so the Elter hat in Mendel, yeah? The Tater had the Elter brother in Mendel. So Mrs. Itkin told me how much they come say. He was living there in Yekaterinslav, in Almata, and his parents sent him with food for the Rebbe's parents for Tisha B'Av. Literally 11 days for the Petite. It was far fasting and up fasting. Food for before the fast and after the fast. The Raskin, Yosef Raskin. This is Reb David Raskin's parents. But they sent the food with an older brother whose name was Mendel. He lived in London. I think he had a Riches Yom. He had a Riches Yom, yeah?
No.
Huh?
זה נסתומי.
היה לו אריכות ימים, הוא אומר.
הוא אומר הריכס.
לא, זה בלשון ככה, נו.
And you left there line.
גלת ליין.
As I weg nicht line.
כמויה.
אולי 110.
Oh, that's it? Okay, so I'm making a mistake. Ich mache a toss. Whatever the case is. Anyway, he went into Rebbe Leivik to bring food, and Rebbe Leivik ain't done read in Kabbalah, you understand? He doesn't understand a word. And Rebbe Leivik is talking. So the Rebbe Tzimchana says to, and the Rechetz the Gad, so the Rebbe Tzimchana says to Rebbe Leivik, the Baldatonis, Erdafes, Midafnes, let him go. And Rebbe Leivik keeps talking. The Rebbe Leivik talked into the fast. Into the fast. He didn't eat and she didn't eat and the Bacha didn't eat. Talk Kabbalah. He didn't understand a single word. Went on for hours. We got Kabbalah. Anyway, this guy Mendel comes home. He walks into his house and his mother grabs him and she starts to kiss him and to hug him like as if he came back from the dead. They came from the army to take him to the front. And Rebbe Leivik got get a Kabbalah. He wasn't home. He pushed and saved his life. He pushed and saved his life. Yeah. I'll tell you a shade of mice. In Tafshin Anaf, they met a woman in Moscow whose name was maybe Klovgant? What's the other name? Altois, yeah? Esther Altois could be. It was in the Bais Chayenu. Remember the Bais Chayenu magazine? They met an old woman who was very close to the Rabbi. I don't know if she was from, she was living in Moscow. She was there when the Rebbe's father passed away. She was a teenager. I think she was an Altois. It's not Altois Kluvgant. I think she was an Altois. So she was about 18 years old. And you have to remember, like you say in Eichem, it's like all the movis. It's possible. I don't remember.
This guy's father was there. The guy on the video, his father was right
there. Of course,
there.
B'shas Ma'aseh, right. And they took their little bicycles and they went around the whole city to tell everybody.
Yeah.
There was death everywhere. People were dying like flies. I mean, death was like breakfast to lunch. There was death everywhere. The Rebbe's father passed away. Everyone came. She came to the house. She walked into the house, and she melted down. She started screaming hysterically. She became so upset. And the Rebbe Tzachana turned to her and said to her, "Bei Yidden schreit man nicht." That's a story. Under those conditions, the Rebbe Tzachana just lost her husband. So this woman starts to scream, and the Rebbe Tzachana, and she repeated the story almost 50 years later. You could see the pu'ula. The Rebbe Tzachana says she was an 18-year-old girl. She told her, this happened in 1944. She was interviewed in 1991. This is one of the, almost 50 years, she tells the story. The Rebbe turned to her and said, "Bei Yidden schreit man nicht. Bei Yidden schreit man nicht." Anyway, so the Rebbe's father passed away, verschickt, and the Rebbe got news that his father passed away. When the Rebbe found out that his father passed away, he was given the wrong date. You know this, right? That there was a Kevis Lubavitch in New York that came out, and there was an article written without a name of the author. The Frierdiker Rebbe wrote the article himself. That this week is Ankum the Besura to the Chassan the Beidasiya, describing the Rebbe about the passing of his father, and then it describes in a whole page who he was, Rebbe Leivik. And there it says that the date of the Histalkus was Chof Gimel Menachem. They didn't have the right date, Chof Gimel Menachem. And the Rebbe, every year. No, I'm sure he found out. Until he found out was probably weeks later. But by the time the following Chof came, I'm imagining he already knew at that point. But every year the Rebbe made a Siyum Masechta. The Rebbe used to make a Farbrengen for his father's Yorzait and make a Siyum Masechta. Before Yud Shvat, the Rebbe made a Siyum Masechta. People came, people didn't come. As soon as the Rebbe became Rebbe, all of a sudden everybody was interested in everything that he had to say. Before that, it depended on how interesting he was, But the Rebbe made a Farbrengen every year for his father's Yorzait, and he said a Hadrin. And the Rebbe said once about Chof Menachemov, Heint is a Nigle Nacht. That was the expression was. Heint is a Nigle Nacht. The Yorzeit of his father and his mother, he didn't know his Emay Mechsidis. It was a Nigle Nacht. They made a Siyum Masechta. I think it was the Siyum Masechta, but a Hadrin, Siyum Masechta. It's chus of his parents.
Shalom Beraski, going asking one of the older brothers, was a sheikh in London.
Right.
So
he had a Riches Yomim,
Well, he died he was in his 80s,
If he died a few years ago, he was probably in his 90s, but okay.
Okay. Anyway, he was at the Tahara of Rabbi. And every Chof, yeah, they used to describe, we're not going into it now, we used to describe the way they did the Tahara. I think probably all the
Get up to the Rebbe. Van Rebbe. He heißt Osher. Asker. So you know that he lived in Washington. Rabbi Edelman, David Edelman told me, I heard it in the mikveh. He said it's such a geschmack of art. He was a modern man, this guy, Osher. Asker, Rabbi Rebbe. Father was a god. Father was the chas of the Rebbe Marash. It was a big rov. So when the Rebbe came on a Monday, Chof Chasivim was on a Monday, but we didn't know the day. And Hayemim doesn't say the date. It says 7th of New York. When they printed the Igris, so they knew the date. It was a letter to the Radam. Monday, Chof Chasivim, and he writes in the Bavakasha, Lohidia Libnoi Marosha Sheyichye, Libnoi Yedidi Marosha. The Rebbe asks the Radam to tell his son. So he told me that David Edelman, he was pushed in the mikveh. He likes to tell stories. That David Edelman was one of those Jews who knew that a person like him is not allowed to close his mouth. He was from the few for some Geret. He told stories. Wait, let me finish. Let me tell you the Maaseh. That this Osher, whenever he would meet the Rebbe would stand up and hug him and kiss him. So Bachai from Friedrich and Rebbe, whenever he was a clean-shaven man, when the Rebbe would see him, the Rebbe would stand up and embrace him and kiss him on the cheek. When the Rebbe became Rebbe, so he came over here, and the Rebbe got up, kissed him on the cheek, And after it happened a few times, he said, I am not coming. I'm a dead nerid. The Rebbe's going to kiss me? He pushed it, stop. Imagine not coming to the Rebbe because you don't want the Rebbe to kiss you. Not the Rebbe should ball you out. The idea, the Rebbe Kushtan. The Rebbe even Hashekoto.
He saved the Rebbe's life.
He's physically saved the Rebbe's life. The Pashtas.
He lived in
In later, I guess, yeah. In Springfield, Massachusetts.
He made false papers, right?
No, he negotiated. It was apparently, in Tafshin Anaf, they gave out a Kuntris. They gave out a Kuntris Chof Chesiv in Tafshin Anaf. And they just tell the story. The Rebbe was in Marseille, or Nice, and then he found out that the head of the embassy in that city was an anti-Semite. So he pushed it, moved. This guy Usher did whatever he needed to on the American side to extra the papers. There was a mishpacha that gave the Rebbe their tickets. You know that. Her parents.
Yeah.
The name was with a gimel. I forgot the name.
They give the
And they were some ungekommen, and they were dialogue in Hashem. They gave they didn't make
Yeah, but
it
there was a reason why they
because they didn't have visas.
didn't have visas, right?
That ticket
Gimel, no, with Areish. So the Rebbe was Makateva. His relationship with the Bestritzkis also was very, very, very special.
label, yeah.
Before the Nesias, he would go to Farakway to hang out with them. A very, very special relationship.
Dr. Bergman also said that youth-based Tamils from Farbrengen in Springfield, because they've got Ashayachas that make.
The Rabinovich?
Could be people in his community. Could be Rabinovich.
He was here in America.
Yeah, but he says, Shas-wise, he had paid time. They were involved, they asked brothers, and they used to Farbrengen every year, youth-based Tamils because of it.
And talk about it.
Yeah. And Zalman Taito also.
Was an agent.
Same. If I come to my Shabbos, so sometimes he used to come to Mishkan Gemara from around the corner. That come in Milchamayim, but that's a threat.
Rabbi Paltiel,
No,
can I ask you a personal question?
I am not going to promise to answer, but you're free to answer.
So the corona affected your connection with the Rebbe and the Rebbe positively or negatively or בכלל?
He had a Richis Yomi massacre?
I have no idea.
And I have a brother also.
Could be.
Him and everything stuff.
Ja, ich hab's nicht erzählt. Das war die Frage von sich.
Hij zegt geen. Ik kook of naar een kedish. I think about the Yoel. Yeah, I mean, you know, we lost.
43 people.
But which 43?
Top 43.
Was one about Abonim. Was Rosh Yeshiva.
Voor het teruggezet 50.
It's.
Machines at the Chabad America in New York. Rubashkin, but then Crown Heights to the 43.
Best, man halt mitten etwas, ja. Aber halt mitten kann man nicht sehen, den ganzen Picture. Ist jeder eine Moltois, wie stellt sich vor, man wird kennen gucken in 10 Jahren von heute auf dem mein mit dem Matzev. I don't see it as negatively as other people. Maybe it's because I'm selfish. I mean, I'm not trying to negate the losses. My big fear is when the dust settles, Panosa. You didn't have much Panosa. You didn't lost their jobs. And Chlau people lost Panosa. Maybe we should figure it out. I just, from where I'm sitting right now, I don't see it as negatively as other people do. Maybe I'm stupid, maybe I'm naive, maybe I'm just thinking about myself. That's it. Ich habe Schwieger, die waren nicht gesund, das ist immer Baruch Hashem. Meine Eltern wird nicht einmal gesund, Baruch Hashem. So it's nicht it's so personal, but Talasheni, the losses that we suffered. You know, 2 of my friends lost their fathers. 2 of my friends, my classmates lost their fathers. It's pretty intense. Du hast mich gefragt, habe ich dir geantwortet. Was hat geholfen, der Mensch, weiß ich nicht.
Nicht stocken.
Ich will das sagen, etwas kommen. Ich gebe eine Tracht, ja? Der Mescher der Historie hat das getroffen als Sachmann. Als solche Epidemics treffen von Zeit zu Zeit. Es kommt sich in eine neue Machle, keiner weiß nicht von dem, man weiß nicht, wie sie heilen das. Und es ist weiß, das haben wir gegeben. Es nimmt Junge und Alte, Gesunde und Kranke. Die Kranke bleiben leben, die Gesunde, der Rahmen, mal das heißt, dass es ist. Als haben wir gegeben, können wir nicht wissen, wer wird leben, wer wird sterben. Aber historisch, als sie gewähnt, die Magefes, wer hat gelitten? Alte Menschen, kranke Menschen und Kinder. Eine von der größten Nisse. Du hast nicht keine Sorge, was ein Nest das ist. Die Machle hat Bechlam nicht umgerührt, die Kinder. Ich habe gedacht, meine Chavere, ich habe das gedacht, das sag mal.
And to a big extent, not the ladies either.
Maybe, but
Big
women,
extent.
I don't know
Just
this,
100%.
but the children were not touched. You know, my thought was, ותפכם אשר אמרתם לבז יהיה, הימה יבואשם. Du hast nicht gesagt, ich habe es immer gesagt, meine Chavere, auf einem Zoom. Sagt eine von der Chavere, you know, my father told me that he has 9 brothers and sisters buried in a cemetery in Borough Park from the Magay from 100 years ago. 9.
Ich will 100 Jahre zurück.
100 years ago. The numbers of the ness, das ist ein ness. Das heißt, man kann nicht, man halt mitten, we're in the middle of it. We don't have a bird's eye view, we're living it. And again, what's going to be the future?
Kinder, ich sage,
Verstehst du das, mate? 9 brothers and sisters.
Gehört wegen dem die ganze Zeit.
Das ist ein Nest, Sha'en Kamayur, kommen. Das ist ein Nest, Sha'en Kamayur. Die Kinder haben beklaut nicht gewusst, dass sie trocken das herum.
Habt ihr das getroffen?
In der ganzen Historie, das came all nicht getroffen.
Das haben wir getrunken?
They got sick. They didn't show any symptoms. They showed no symptoms.
My kids,
No, but you
A
didn't.
lot carried. The Hatzalah people told me that the problem is the children. I said to someone from the Hatzalah, Children?
Meine Kinder alle gehabt haben Symptoms. No symptoms, aber so gar nicht gewesen.
Ruben gekommen von den Kindern didn't show any
So
symptoms.
gehabt Fieber,
Here?
aber gar nicht Sakone.
Das kann ich gar nicht kennen, weil was geht nicht darum geht.
Aber das sagt Kinder, haben sie gegeben, sie ihre Bobbes und sie das. Und sie beklagen nicht gewusst, dass sie tragen das.
Das ist interessant. Sie haben gesagt, gleich, die Kinder sollen bald nicht gehen.
But you should know this is a nest, this is a nest, this is a nest, she'en komayo.
Ja, mich wollen immer Eise wollten gewinnen voll, ich habe schon.
Betach, maar wat?
gewinnen.
Als we geen kinderen, wat is dat?
That,
Bais zijn schon.
and then usually these epidemics affect children. They always do.
Why? Because their immune system is not strong.
Why, I don't know. But the fact is, so I don't know, ich nicht kein Rebbe, ich nicht kein Novi, ich mein Mensch.
Aber you didn't have it. Anybody else didn't have it? Who didn't have it? I hope this guy. You still nicht gather. You took a blood test? Maybe you do. Ah, negative?
Ich habe nicht genannt.
Was ist genannt? Yes, no blood.
Gegangen bei der Doctor's Office, sag ich betten.
Everybody had it.
Aber schon jemals gehört,
Eén van gaat in december. Twee Schaneken.
weiß nicht.
This
Oh,
you like it, nothing.
Ja,
Plasma.
de Woche Schaneken. We hebben verkeerd.
Is very good.
Tell us that the colors in this gado is something is wrong. No, maar het is wegen jongen.
אולי אני לא בן אדם.
צריך לדבר על דברים שמחים עכשיו. אז מה אנחנו
You started it.
נכון. So, was geht mir nach Reus mit der Chof auf Farbrengen mit?
Aber der Reisland von der
Kibbut
Verbringung,
Aveim.
haben wir so ein bisschen trachten, wir kriegen wir daheim.
Wat is het?
Goal, das sagt uns
Kibbut
bitte.
Aveim.
Ich will der Monnen,
Waft
mein
er
Vetter.
Mecho.
Ich will der Monnen. I want to mention my uncle, Rebbe Daniel, when my mother was very sick 2 years ago. I didn't have a chance to do kibbutz game physically because I lived here the past 17 years. So, but my connection with my parents was crazy good. So when I was
Is crazy good, yeah.
Yes, mit meiner Tate, meine Mama hat schon Nifter geworden, der Rabbi Yorzait. So my mother was sick. The first time that I was told she's sick was before Rosh Hashanah, so I went for 24 hours to say, 2 years ago. Exactly 2 years ago. Then after Tishrei, around Kislev, or the beginning of Kislev, they said she's very bad, so I went. And then he told me, I told them she's very, very bad. I went only for a few days. He said, stay there today with the internet, with the computers. You can do work from all over the world. You will control from there, and you have an assistant. I was next to my mother's bed 6.5 weeks, 24/7.
Wow.
Only once a day for an hour I went to my parents' house to take a shower. Ich habe gedauert dort, geschlafen dort, gemacht 24/7. And I counted around 950 hours next to my mother bis Chusay. He paid me, he said,
Yeah, let him go.
Gut, ist ein Schwager gewesen, aber wie gesagt, du wirst keinmal nicht Chaot haben auf Kibbudim. Bleib da.
Das ist ein Club.
לא, זהו, הוא נתן לו.
הוא היה הבוס שלי, הוא יכול היה להגיד תחזור.
זה מה ש... כל הכבוד.
He could tell me come back.
Sein Vater ist das Schwester mit seinem Vater.
Das ist
וזה
bei
לא
mir.
רק זה, בוא'נה, זה לא רק זה, תמיד,
Macht von meinem Namen.
כשמישהו מגיע מפה לשם,
Carmen, sein Vater ist Schwester mit seinem Vater, ja?
Was ich mache.
משק, הוא מגיע מפה, זה אחרת מה שאתה נמצא שם. אלה שאתה לא עובד, אתה נמצא כל היום, כל הזה. הייתי ב...
זה לא רק זה. 24/7, ich bin gewöhnt dort in Alena, זה wie
לא,
ein
מדברים כל הזמן, זה בתפקיד שלה. הייתי השנה, הייתי פעמיים. הייתי בבית חולים איזה שבוע, אז הייתי טוב. עכשיו עבר גם...
Was ist denn da gezahlt? Was ist denn da
Sie gewinnen noch die Leute an. Alt sind da gezahlt. Die essen,
נשים משתדלים. אני באמא שלי לא הייתי נעשה מספיק. פעם זה הרבה. אתה מדבר רק ב20 שנה, לפני 20 שנה. אבל הייתי נוסע, הייתי נוסע פעם
Ich
שנה.
schicke Salmen nach Picture, wie sitzt, das ist schön.
זה היה...
Ich bin einfach cool.
אה? אני מדבר מה משהו.
Ja.
Guck da rein, schau mir Samuel.
אני הייתי קצת...
Der Rebbe.
Aber ich wollte mal sehen.
לא היה טלפונים, הייתי פעם שנה.
Leivik. It's not good to cover. But he says it in a very unusual tone.
אני יורד מההר,
Right.
זה היה מה הייתי עובר, אבל הייתי... רק אתה לא עושה כל יום, אתה פעם אחת אתה שוקע מה? אתה יודע שזה הולך. עד שזה, אבל אם אבא שלי, אני מאחר קצת בזה,
Ja, ja.
Rambam mit Yossi,
הוא לבד בבית, יש לי שתי אחיות, צדדים שם.
Right. He writes of the Rebbe Gwalik.
יוסי כבר עבר את כל העסק הזה.
And the Rebbe is saying, it's nicht Punkt Azeh. And the Rebbe's father telling him, no, this is your Azeh. One of the most interesting exchanges
זה ליחיל, זה מה
is that around Tzaddik Bais,
יקרה?
the Rebbe wrote 2 letters.
תגידו, מה היה שם היום? רצו להרוג אותי.
One to his father and one to his father-in-law.
היה...
Ze verstehen de Ingen
הוא
von
דיבר מה
Schminis
זה?
und Schminis.
טוב, הביתה לבן.
Talmud Chochem, da Papa, der hat sich gehabt, dass da Talmud Chochem. Schminis und Schminis. Is Leivik schreibt ihm a längeren Brief. A längeren Brief, will ich sagen. Und der Friedrich Rebbe schreibt, Likishen Yisro, Nedaber, Ponem, Ponem.